Chapter 16-18. When this thought appeared in everyone's mind, they realized that there was a problem. Ji Tianxing had created a series of miracles. Unknowingly, he had left an impression on everyone that he was invincible. In the past, no one had thought that he could be compared to Qin Sangqiong. But now, he seemed to have surpassed Qin Sangqiong. Everyone had always thought that Qin Sangqiong was the #1 genius. However, for the past 6 months, no one had seen Qin Sangqiong fight. On the other hand, Ji Tianxing had fought a few times, and each time, he was more powerful than the last. His strength was unbelievable. After comparing the two of them, everyone felt that Ji Tianxing was more powerful. Of course, since the two of them had not really fought, no one could be sure of the result. Everyone was looking forward to seeing Qin Sangqiong fight with Ji Tianxing. Qin Sangqiong finally stepped into the fighting ring as everyone looked at him with anticipation. He was wearing a gray linen shirt and a pair of black cloth shoes. He held the Sangqiong sword in his arms and stood proudly in the middle of the fighting ring. Everyone thought that he would challenge Ji Tianxing and have a fight with Ji Tianxing. However, to everyone's surprise, he looked at Song Zhanyu calmly and asked, "Song Zhanyu, can you still hold on?" He had challenged Song Zhanyu first. Song Zhanyu also did not expect this result. He was stunned on the spot, and his expression became very ugly. His eyes surged with anger. Damn it! Previously Yin Wuke challenged me. Then Ji Tianxing challenged me. Now that I am severely injured, even Qin Sangqiong wants to challenge me. If he accepted Qin Sangqiong's challenge, he would have to fight 3 rounds in a row and he would not be able to take a breather. His powers were depleted and he was severely injured. If he were to fight with Qin Sangqiong, he would definitely lose. If he did not accept Qin Sangqiong's challenge, he would be giving up and losing face. At that moment, he was in a dilemma as he weighed the pros and cons in silence. The few guardians, divine messengers and geniuses were waiting quietly. No one objected to Qin Sangqiong's decision and they understood what he meant. He clearly wanted to exclude Song Zhanyu and compete with Ji Tianxing for the honor of being the #1 genius. Everyone's eyes were bright. Of course, they could tell that Song Zhanyu was weaker than Ji Tianxing and Qin Sangqiong. He could only be ranked 3rd. This was the truth. No matter how angry and unwilling Song Zhanyu was, it could not be changed. 10 breaths of time passed. After careful consideration, Song Zhanyu finally decided to forfeit and admit defeat. "I admit defeat." He lowered his head, expressionless, and said these 3 words in a low voice. Everyone in the square had long expected this result and did not feel surprised. Although Song Zhanyu directly admitted defeat, which was slightly incompetent and humiliating. But this was the wisest course of action. Even if he endured his injuries and fought with Qin Sangqiong, he would still lose in the end and his injuries would be even worse. The Great Guardian announced the result loudly. Qin Sangqiong wins this battle. Song Zhanyu was ranked 3rd. In the last round, Ji Tianxing will fight against Qin Sangqiong for the 1st place. As his majestic voice fell, Ji Tianxing stepped into the colorful light shield. He looked calm as he walked to the middle of the arena and stopped 100 feet away from Qin Sangqiong. The two of them faced each other in the arena. Vast amounts of energy were accumulating in their bodies and they were filled with a strong fighting spirit. "Ji Tianxing, I have been waiting for this day for half a year." Qin Sangqiong held the Sangqiong saber in his arms and looked sharply at Ji Tianxing. He said in a serious tone, "Before I met you, I looked down on the geniuses from various countries and no one was worthy of my attention. It was only when you appeared that my fighting spirit and fighting spirit were ignited. Today, you and I will have a duel at the peak of God Bestowment Mountain, in front of everyone here, and we will decide who is stronger." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows as the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile. "You think quite highly of me. Unfortunately, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed." "What do you mean?" Qin Sangqiong frowned and his eyes turned cold. The smile on Ji Tianxing's face grew more and more playful. He said meaningfully, "You see me as your #1 enemy, but I don't. I am just wondering how many moves you can take from my sword?" Qin Sangqiong frowned and his cheeks twitched. He said coldly, "Ji Tianxing, I admit that you are strong. However, you are too arrogant and you do not know your place. Ji Tianxing smiled and said calmly, I am just stating a fact. You think I am arrogant because you are ignorant. Qin Zhangxiong's eyes were filled with coldness. He slowly drew out the Zhangxiong saber and his body lit up with dazzling flames. Ji Tianxing, if you are trying to provoke me with such an inferior method, you have underestimated me. In his opinion, Ji Tianxing was deliberately provoking him so that he would not be able to unleash his strongest combat strength. However, Ji Tianxing did not want to talk nonsense with him. He said firmly, you will definitely lose within 10 moves. Arrogant. Qin Zhangxiong shouted and jumped into the sky. He held the Zhangxiong saber with both hands and slashed down. Sky-splitting feather saber. The pitch-black Zhangxiong saber gave off a dazzling golden light and slashed out 49 rays of saber radiance that were 100 feet long. Each ray of golden saber radiance contained a powerful force that could destroy everything. It was more dazzling than the sun. The 49 rays of saber radiance were arranged according to a special pattern and formed a mysterious saber array. It activated the power of heaven and earth and slashed down on Ji Tianxing from the sky. Suddenly, the entire arena was sealed by the saber radiance. The invisible divine power of 10,000 miles of heaven and earth firmly suppressed Ji Tianxing, making it impossible for him to escape. At this moment, Qin Zhangxiong's body was majestic. He gave off a holy and majestic aura as if he was the god of war. When the great guardian, Hong Qingtian, and a few divine messengers saw this, they were shocked and started to whisper to each other. It is the heavenly saber. Qin Zhangxiong has indeed mastered this tribulation secret skill. Qin Zhangxiong is indeed the top genius. With the strength of the primordial soul realm, he managed to master this saber skill in just 1 month. This is unbelievable. I did not expect him to use the heavenly saber in his first move. It seems like he really sees Ji Tianxing as his #1 opponent. Qin Zhangxiong's saber skill has reached the small completion realm. It is very powerful. Ji Tianxing is in trouble. Everyone was staring at the arena and they were eager to see how Ji Tianxing would get out of this predicament. To everyone's surprise, Ji Tianxing looked calm as if he did not feel threatened at all. Not only did he not dodge or block, but he also took out the black dragon sword and attacked directly. Draw your sword, he shouted. Golden light surged out of his body and he pulled out the black dragon sword. The sword radiance flashed. A giant golden sword that was 100 feet long exploded with a destructive force and slashed toward Qin Zhangxiong in the sky. Bang, 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 bang. The giant golden sword collided with the dozen rays of saber radiance. The entire arena had turned into a world of golden light. Chapter 1619. After a long while, the golden radiance that covered the sky finally dissipated. The 49 golden saber radiance and the giant golden sword had all collapsed. Ji Tianxing and Qin Zhangxiong had fought each other head-on. They were evenly matched and neither of them had gained the upper hand. Qin Zhangxiong stood in the sky and looked down at Ji Tianxing with a cold smile. You are just SOSO. I have overestimated you. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said calmly, it was just the first move. I only used 70% of my strength. Qin Zhangxiong frowned and the veins on his forehead bulged. He looked terrible. Humph. Even so, you will not be able to defeat me in 10 moves. I will never be defeated by you. I will be the #1 genius. He shouted angrily and swung his firmament saber for the second time with all his strength. 7 suns dazzling firmament. The firmament saber emitted a dazzling flame that covered the sky. 7 giant sabers that were hundreds of feet long appeared from the flame and slashed toward Ji Tianxing in a crisscross pattern. The 7 giant sabers were arranged in the position of the 7 stars. They contained the mysteries of the stars and attracted the power of the stars. They were more dazzling than the sun. Kill! Following Qin Zhangxiong's furious roar, 7 giant flaming blades slashed down and shrouded Ji Tianxing's figure. Ji Tianxing was fearless. He flew up into the sky and swung his black dragon sword to counter the attack. 7 stars sword. He swung his black dragon sword and slashed out 7 giant golden swords. Each golden sword radiance was surrounded by dazzling purple thunderbolts. They were extremely powerful. Bang, 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 bang. The 7 sword radiance and the 7 saber radiance collided and created a deafening sound. Once again, the flame and the golden light shards filled the entire light shield and turned the arena into a chaotic area. The saber radiance and the sword radiance collapsed at the same time. Both of them were hit by the raging shockwave. Qin Xianxia flew backward for thousands of feet and crashed into the 5-colored light shield. He fell to the ground with a pale face and blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. Ji Tianxing retreated 1,000 feet away. Then he stopped and stood firmly in the sky. His expression was normal and his aura was still stable. It was obvious that Qin Xianxia was at a disadvantage in the second exchange and his internal organs were injured. Ji Tianxing's physical defense was even stronger. He blocked the power of the shockwave and remained unscathed. The protectors, god envoys, and geniuses shuddered upon seeing this. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Oh my god! Ji Tianxing is actually unscathed? Qin Xianxia is injured? They have only exchanged 2 moves. Ji Tianxing's strength is actually so strong. Although Qin Xianxia is only slightly injured, his strength is obviously not as good as Ji Tianxing's. I'm afraid the situation is not optimistic. Just as the crowd was discussing this, another fierce fight broke out in the arena. Ji Tianxing took the initiative to attack. He held the black dragon sword with both hands and slashed at Qin Xianxia. Broken Moon Sword. He exerted all his strength and slashed out a 2,000 feet long giant golden sword. Along with the raging holy thunder, the sword slashed toward Qin Xianxia. The sword slashed across the sky and dazzled with golden light and thunder. Its power was so terrifying that it seemed to be able to tear the sky and cut the sun and moon in half. Without the protection of the 5-colored light shield, the entire Mount God bestowment would have been slashed apart by the sword. Qin Xianxia frowned and his eyes became extremely solemn. He felt the threat of death and had to fight with all his strength and caution. Fantasy space shattering blade. He shouted angrily. He held the Xianxia sword with both hands and slashed out a 1,000-meter-long giant golden blade toward Ji Tianxing. This was only the 3rd exchange of blows between the two. For his dignity, he could only choose to fight head-on. He could not dodge or block the attack. The pride of a genius made him unable to admit that he was not as good as Ji Tianxing. Kaboom! The saber radiance and the sword radiance collided and exploded with a thunderous sound. Suddenly, the loud sound echoed throughout the peak of Mount God bestowment. The terrifying shockwave shook the entire mountain. The 5-colored light shield also shook violently and rippled. The saber radiance and the sword radiance shattered at the same time and turned into billions of golden light shards. They hit the ground and the 5-colored light shield. Ji Tianxing stood in the sky unscathed and was pushed back 200 steps by the shockwave. Qin Xianxia was sent flying again. He crashed into the 5-colored light shield and fell to the edge of the square. When he got up from the ground, his hair was disheveled and his face was as pale as a sheet. Puff! He spat out a mouthful of blood and staggered. The primordial spirit in his body fluctuated violently and became very disordered. What was worse was that his long robe and hair were charred and tattered by the thunder. Black smoke kept coming out of his head. A strong sense of defeat and humiliation surged into his heart, causing his entire body to tremble, and his eyes to be filled with a layer of blood. Ji Tianxing, you are indeed the son of the oracle. No matter how angry and humiliated Qin Xianxia was, he had to admit that Ji Tianxing was really powerful. From the start of their fight until now, it had always been an open and above-board confrontation. He could not defeat Ji Tianxing and was severely injured. However, he accepted it wholeheartedly and had no complaints. At the edge of the square, the guardians, messengers and geniuses were shocked and could not believe what they had seen. Qin Xianxia is injured again? How can he be so severely injured? This is unbelievable. Ji Tianxing is unscathed but Qin Xianxia is severely injured? It seems like there is no suspense in the outcome. Qin Xianxia is definitely going to lose. I did not expect Ji Tianxing to grow so quickly. Half a year ago, he was only at LV5 Primordial Spirit Realm. Now, he is already at LV7 Primordial Spirit Realm. Within half a year, he has risen by 2 cultivation realms. This speed is really shocking and unprecedented. In terms of suspense, Qin Xianxia is most likely going to lose. Now, I am only concerned about whether he can withstand 10 moves. That's right. Although Ji Tianxing is arrogant, everything he said has come true. Previously, when he said that he could defeat Qin Xianxia within 10 moves, everyone thought that he was too arrogant. Now, I believe him. Just as the crowd was discussing, Ji Tianxing, who was in the ring, spoke. He looked at Qin Xianxia and said calmly, "The outcome has been decided. You should admit defeat." Qin Xianxia was stunned for a moment before he burst out laughing. Ji Tianxing, you are so arrogant that I am speechless. However, don't even think about it. No matter how weak I am, I will not be defeated within 10 moves and I will not admit defeat. His loud and clear laughter contained a strong sense of desolation and unyieldingness. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said calmly, "So what if you can withstand 10 moves? By then, your injuries will be more serious and it will affect the future kingdom's exchange. Why do you have to do this?" As soon as he said this, the 2 guardians and the 6 divine envoys all nodded in agreement. No matter who won first place, Ji Tianxing or Qin Xianxia, they could accept it. What they were most concerned about was the upcoming exchange between the 3 divine kingdoms. Chapter 1620. The Great Guardian, Hong Tian, and the 6 divine messengers felt that there was no need to continue the fight. The situation was clear. Qin Xianxia was no match for Ji Tianxing. There was no point in continuing the fight as it would not change the outcome. Instead, it would worsen Qin Xianxia's injuries. If it affected the upcoming kingdom exchange meet, it would be a loss for the vast kingdom. Many geniuses understood this. However, how could Qin Xianxia admit defeat? He flipped his left hand and took out a wine gourd. He tilted his head back and gulped down a few mouthfuls of wine. The wine that flowed out of the 1,000-drunken gourd was light yellow in color and it exuded a strong and violent spiritual qi. After 3 mouthfuls of wine, Qin Xianxia put away the 1,000-drunken gourd. His face was flushed and his eyes were blurred. The spiritual qi in his body surged and the wine turned into a violent spiritual power that flowed through his body. Soon after, his skin turned red and a faint golden light shone from the top of his head. His injuries were healing rapidly and his combat strength was increasing rapidly. Ji Tianxing, do you think you've won? Impossible. Now, I'll show you my real trump card. Qin Xianxia wiped the wine off the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. He formed a spiritual art with his left hand and held the firmament saber with his right hand. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. His body became blurry and illusory. He merged with the firmament saber and disappeared. Drunken dance of 1,000 illusions, shattering the firmament saber. Qin Xianxia's voice was heard from the golden firmament saber that covered the sky. It was powerful and domineering. In the next moment, tens of thousands of sharp golden firmament sabers formed a tight formation and fell from the sky. The entire fighting ring turned into a world of golden light. Ji Tianxing's body was instantly drowned in the golden light. Seeing this, the great guardian, Hong Tian, and the rest of the geniuses were shocked. What saber skill is this? It looks like the firmament saber, but it doesn't look like it. I get it now. This is indeed the firmament saber secret skill. However, Qin Xianxia has added his own understanding and changed it. Is that so? This is incredible. Qin Xianxia could master a tribulation-level mystic technique within a month. He could even add his own insights into it and improve it. He's a genius that only appears once in 100 years. To be fair, Qin Xianxia is indeed one of the top geniuses in the past 100 years. Unfortunately, his luck was not good. He actually met Ji Tianxing, this monster. Just as the crowd was discussing, Ji Tianxing, who was in the ring, began his counterattack. Heaven-splitting sword. He gripped the black dragon sword with both hands as his entire body radiated with dazzling golden light. He slashed out a massive sword over 10,000 feet in length with an invincible stance. The giant dark golden sword was surrounded by dense bolts of divine lightning, and it exploded with a power that could destroy the heavens and earth. Boom, boom, boom. Amidst the deafening noise, the giant golden sword shattered the countless saber lights as if they were dried twigs. The great array formed by tens of thousands of light blades was actually shattered by the giant sword. It collapsed into billions of pieces and scattered in the sky. Qin Xianxia, who had disappeared, was forced to reveal his original form. He was hit by the giant sword and flew out with blood gushing out of his body. Bam! He crashed into the colorful light shield at the corner of the square and fell to the ground. He rolled a few times before coming to a stop. Then, the golden light shards that covered the sky and covered the earth fell to the ground and dissipated. Qin Xianxia's modified Heavenly Blade ultimate skill still could not hurt Ji Tianxing. Instead, it was defeated by him. He was completely defeated. He lay on the ground, twitching. Blood gushed out of his body like a fountain and dyed his clothes and hair. His left arm was almost chopped off. There was a long and narrow wound on his chest and abdomen. It was so deep that his bones could be seen. His primordial spirit, in particular, was severely injured and his consciousness was somewhat muddled. Ji Tianxing held the black dragon sword in his hand and stood in the sky calmly. He did not continue to attack. Qin Xianxia, stop resisting stubbornly. It's meaningless. The great guardian, Hong Qingtian, and a few divine messengers also tried to persuade him. Qin Xianxia, you are severely injured. Don't force yourself. Just admit defeat. No matter who gets first place, you will have to participate in the Holy Kingdom exchange meet soon and win glory for the vast Holy Kingdom. Qin Xianxia, if you continue to be stubborn, your injuries will only worsen. You will not be able to recover in 3 to 5 months. By then, it will affect the Holy Kingdom exchange meet. A real genius will not care about temporary gains and losses. Qin Xianxia, you have to look further. The exchange meet between the 3 holy kingdoms is the best opportunity to make a name for yourself. Everyone tried to persuade Qin Xianxia to stop his meaningless resistance. However, he ignored everyone's persuasion. He supported himself with the heavenly blade and staggered to his feet. He wiped the blood off his face with his sleeve and looked at Ji Tianxing with determination. He said in a hoarse and low voice, Ji Tianxing, as a martial artist, we must not only be arrogant, but we must also be unyielding. Even if I am not as skilled as you and will definitely be defeated by your sword, I will survive 10 moves. Qin Xianxia put his left hand behind his back and raised the heavenly blade with his right hand. He pointed it at Ji Tianxing and shouted in a deep voice, Bring it on. Let me see how you are going to defeat me in 10 moves. As soon as he finished speaking, his entire body lit up with a dazzling golden light. It condensed into a dark golden shield that protected him. Apparently, he had made up his mind to not fight Ji Tianxing head-on. He would defend himself with all his might and survive 10 moves no matter what. Even if he knew that he would lose with dignity. Ji Tianxing took a deep look at him and said with a calm tone, Although you're stubborn, you're not as annoying as I thought. Since you insist on fighting, I will fulfill your wish. As he spoke, he held the black dragon sword in his right hand and performed a unique sword skill with all his might. The 5th move, Black Dragon Shines. He activated a vast amount of spiritual power and poured it into the black dragon sword. He then slashed at Qin Xianxia. At that moment, the black dragon sword flew out of his hand and turned into a huge black sword that was thousands of feet long. It fell from the sky and slashed at Qin Xianxia. A vast and holy aura that could suppress the heavens and the earth burst out from the black dragon sword and suppressed Qin Xianxia. Qin Xianxia felt the terrifying suppressive force and his face turned pale. At the critical moment, he held the heavenly blade with both hands and slashed out 4 huge light blades to block the sky above his head. Bam, bam, bam. In the blink of an eye, the giant pitch-black sword that was thousands of feet long shattered the 4 light blades. Next, the huge sword shone brightly and let out a dragon's roar that shook the 9 heavens. Following the dragon's roar, the huge black sword shook its body and turned into a majestic black dragon that was thousands of feet long. The majestic black dragon was covered with dragon scales and shone with a cold light. It stared at Qin Xianxia and stretched out 2 huge dragon claws to attack him from the sky. Kaboom! Chapter 1621. At that moment, everyone was dumbfounded. Everyone stared intently at the majestic and mighty black dragon in the sky above the arena. Their faces were filled with shock. No one dared to believe that Ji Tianxing's sword technique could create a lifelike divine dragon. Everyone thought that their eyes were playing tricks on them. The few young geniuses subconsciously believed that the black dragon was just a shadow. However, the chief enforcer, Hong Qingtan, and the 6 divine messengers could clearly sense that it was not a shadow. There was breathing, heartbeat, and spirit undulations. That was a real black dragon. Everyone was so shocked that their hearts stopped beating, and they even forgot to breathe. It's a real black dragon? A divine dragon. Ji Tianxing actually has a divine dragon. This kid actually hit it so well. A divine dragon. A divine dragon rarely seen in the world. In the entire Shenwu continent, there are only a few that have appeared. No wonder Ji Tianxing could become the oracle's child. Similar exclamations appeared in everyone's minds. In the next moment, an earth-shattering sound was heard. Within the 5-colored light barrier, gravel flew everywhere, and dust filled the sky, obscuring everything. The entire Mount God seal shook violently from the dragon's claw. Everyone steadied themselves and stared at the scene within the light barrier, hoping to see the black dragon again. However, after a long time, the dust in the sky dissipated. Within the 5-colored light barrier, the ground was a mess, and the ground had been reduced to ruins. In the middle of the stage, there was a huge pit. Qin Xianxia was covered in blood, and his hair was disheveled as he lay in the pit, unconscious. Above the pit, Ji Tianxing stood in the sky with an indifferent expression, his hands empty. The majestic and mighty black dragon had already disappeared. Even the black dragon sword that he had just used was gone. The 2 enforcers and the 6 divine messengers were puzzled. The few young geniuses also stared at Ji Tianxing doubtfully and started whispering to each other. Strange? Where did the black dragon go? What's going on? Why did the black dragon disappear? Like I said, it's impossible for there to be a black dragon. That was just a shadow. Divine dragons are the most precious divine beasts in the world, and there are only a few of them in the entire Shenwu continent. Moreover, the few known divine dragons are reared by the 3 divine masters. How could they appear so easily? Ji Tianxing's monstrous talent is already terrifying enough. If he really has a divine dragon, then wouldn't he be heaven-defying? Just as everyone was discussing this matter, Ji Tianxing turned to look at the chief enforcer. Chief enforcer, the battle is over. Please announce the result. Chief Protector immediately came back to his senses and hurriedly announced in a loud voice, "The final battle, Ji Tianxing wins." As his dignified voice sounded, everyone came back to their senses one after another. The few gods' envoys and Wu Kei all revealed gratified smiles and applauded. On the other hand, Jiang Ningxue, Song Zhanyu, and the others wore unpleasant looks with complicated feelings. This was a result that no one had expected. Ji Tianxing turned to leave the arena and returned to Hong Qingtian's side. 2 golden armored guards went up the arena and flew into the deep pit. They carried the unconscious Qin Xianxia out. The chief enforcer removed the defensive array and cast a few rays of dazzling light that enveloped the entire arena. In a short while, the ruined arena was repaired. The cracks on the ground were all healed, the deep pit was filled, and the ground was flat again. The chief enforcer stood in the middle of the square and announced in a dignified voice, "Everyone, this year's Divine Disciple Assessment has come to a successful end. The 41 disciples who were eliminated will have 2 days of rest. After 2 days, they will be sent to the Glacier Divine Mine. In addition, the 10 disciples who advanced successfully became honorary divine disciples. Ji Tianxing, ranked first. Qin Zhangqiong ranked 2nd. Song Zhanyu ranked 3rd. Wuk ranked 4th. Jiang Ningxue ranked 5th. The chief enforcer announced the names of the 10 geniuses. Those whose names were called felt a little emotional, and their eyes were filled with gratification. After all, their wish to come to God's Sealing Mountain had finally come true. They had finally changed their fates and become honorable divine disciples. From now on, they would be able to cultivate on Mount God bestowment, study profound martial arts techniques, and comprehend the divine master's inheritance. This was the dream of all the martial artists in the world. The chief enforcer continued, "Firstly, I would like to congratulate these 10 disciples for becoming divine disciples. Secondly, I would like to announce a very important matter. In 2 months, the top 5 divine disciples will represent the vast divine kingdom to participate in the 3 Great Divine Kingdoms exchange. At that time, the top 15 geniuses of the 3 divine kingdoms will gather and exchange martial arts. I hope that the top 5 divine disciples will be able to get a good ranking in the exchange and bring honor to the vast divine kingdom." Hearing his words, Song Zhanyu, Wuk, Jiang Ningxue and the rest were filled with anticipation. They felt an invisible pressure as if they were carrying a sacred and difficult task. After all, they were going to represent the vast divine kingdom to compete with the geniuses of the other divine kingdoms. At that time, the exchange of the 3 great divine kingdoms would be even more exciting. The other 5 divine disciples were filled with envy and jealousy as they sized up Ji Tianxing and the rest. At this time, the chief enforcer looked at Ji Tianxing and the rest and said, "You have successfully become the top 5 and will be participating in the exchange of the divine kingdoms exchange. I will take out 500 million spiritual stones worth of cultivation resources from the treasury to reward you as a sign of recognition. Later on, I will send a few divine messengers to deliver the cultivation resources to you. Now, you have 2 months to prepare. Take this opportunity to recuperate and continue to improve your strength." After saying that, the chief enforcer left the square in front of the palace with the 6 divine messengers. Hong Qingtian gave Ji Tianxing a few words of advice, then turned around and left. "Tianxing, if you have time tomorrow, come to the west courtyard. I have something to discuss with you." After a while, there were only a few divine disciples left in the square. Other than the severely injured Qin Zhangqiong and Qian Feiyang, who were carried away by the golden armor guards, the rest of them had not left. Everyone gathered around Ji Tianxing and congratulated him with smiles on their faces. "Ji Tianxing, congratulations on becoming the champion. Child Ji, you are indeed the son of God. Today's battle was truly an eye-opener. Especially the battle between you and Qin Zhangqiong. It was so exciting and dazzling. Child Ji, if we encounter any bottlenecks or difficulties in our cultivation in the future, you must guide us." A few God disciples who were ranked at the bottom were trying to please Ji Tianxing, showing their admiration and intimacy towards him. After all, they were all divine disciples who would be cultivating in Mount God for decades. Ji Tianxing was the number 1 genius and the son of God. He was definitely the most valued genius. Chapter 1622. The young geniuses who could enter Mount God Sealing were all quick-witted. Those who could emerge victorious from hundreds of geniuses and become honorary God disciples had their own strengths and were not simple people. In the past half a year, Ji Tianxing had lived in seclusion and rarely interacted with the crowd. Moreover, his words and actions were too arrogant and unrestrained, causing the crowd to dislike him. Hence, the crowd kept a distance from him. Other than Yin Wu Kei, no one was close to him. However, it was different now. Ji Tianxing was not only the son of God, but also the number 1 genius. He had also won the favor of the 3 guardians. The God disciples present were not fools. Of course, they had to curry favor with him. Even if they disliked him, they had to endure it and smile at him. Whoever dared to offend him would not have a good life in the future. Qian Feiyang, Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing were the best examples. One of them was severely injured and unconscious, dropping from 4th to 8th place. The second one self-destructed and died. The third one was defeated miserably and was about to go to the Glacier Divine Mine to mine, Other than a few god disciples who were ranked at the bottom, they were unusually friendly towards Ji Tianxing and tried to curry favor with him. The other three people's reactions were much calmer. Jiang Ningxue stood outside the crowd and looked at Ji Tianxing quietly. She had mixed feelings and her eyes were filled with disappointment. Song Zhanyu looked unhappy. He frowned and his eyes were cold. Yin Wuke was calmer. He looked at Ji Tianxing with a smile. The few disciples of God took turns to fawn on Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing responded with a few indifferent words and dismissed them. At this moment, Yin Wuke walked in front of Ji Tianxing. He cupped his hands and said, "Young Master Ji, congratulations on becoming the #1 genius. You truly deserve this honor. Also, it was unexpected that I was able to rank 4th in the assessment. It was a huge surprise. I have to thank you for taking care of me in the past. Your kindness, Yin Wuke, will never forget it." Ji Tianxing revealed a faint smile and nodded slightly. "There's no need to say any more words of thanks. In the future, you must guard against arrogance and rashness, and work even harder in your cultivation so that you won't let me down." Wu Kei nodded his head profusely and said in a firm tone, "Of course. How can I disappoint young Master Ji?" After saying that, he hesitated for a moment before he mustered up the courage to ask, "Oh right, young Master Ji, the black dragon that you released just now, why did it disappear?" This was the biggest question in his mind, and it was also the question that the disciples of God were most concerned about. However, no one had any friendship with Ji Tianxing, but he was Ji Tianxing's friend, so he was the most suitable person to ask this question. Everyone immediately stared at Ji Tianxing, waiting for his answer. Ji Tianxing showed a face full of confusion, pretending not to understand and asked, "What black dragon?" Yin Wuke smiled awkwardly and asked again, "When you were fighting with Qin Sangqiong just now, didn't you release a black dragon and hit him until he fainted?" A few God's disciples could not hold back their excitement and started to ask questions. "Young Master Ji, that was a real black dragon, wasn't it? Young Master Ji, why do you have a divine dragon? The divine dragon is a rare divine beast. Only the 3 great God Masters have one. Young Master Ji, could you please show us the black dragon again? This is the first time we have seen a divine dragon in our lives." There was even a young and beautiful disciple of God who intimately hugged Ji Tianxing's arm and begged, "Young Master Ji, please show us again. Please?" Ji Tianxing pulled his arm away and said calmly, "You are thinking too much. There is no black dragon. It is all an illusion." After saying that, he turned around and was about to leave. Song Zhanyu had been watching coldly from the side. When he saw that Ji Tianxing had become the center of attention and was being flattered, he felt very uncomfortable. When he saw that Ji Tianxing was about to leave, he could not help but add, "Everyone, please don't make things difficult for young Master Ji. Only the great God Masters have a divine dragon. How could he have one? Let's disperse." Ji Tianxing could not be bothered with them. He turned around and walked toward the Heaven Saint Palace. The disciples of God were disappointed. After whispering to each other for a while, they also dispersed. Only Jiang Ningxue stared at Ji Tianxing's back as he walked away under the setting sun. After being stunned for a while, she woke up from her daze and looked around with a guilty conscience. Seeing that there was no one around, she hurried toward the Heaven Saint Palace. Tianxing had just reached the entrance of the Heaven Saint Palace when he heard light footsteps behind him. "Young Master Ji, please wait." A clear and melodious voice sounded. Ji Tianxing stopped and turned his head to look behind him. He saw Jiang Ningxue in a white dress standing on the clean and tidy white stone path, looking at him with a deep gaze. "Miss Jiang, what is it?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked calmly. Jiang Ningxue had a lot to say, but she hid them in her heart. Now that she met Ji Tianxing's clear eyes, she could not say a word. After hesitating for a while, she walked in front of Ji Tianxing. She stared at him and asked, "Young Master Ji, that black dragon just now was transformed from that treasured sword, right?" Ji Tianxing's expression did not change. He asked calmly, "What black dragon? What treasured sword?" Jiang Ningxue pursed her lips and gathered her courage to say, "Young Master Ji, you don't have to hide it from me." When that black dragon appeared, I saw it clearly. It was a divine dragon. As for that treasured sword, it was the one that you said you would give me. Actually, it was not a sword, but a divine dragon, right? When she asked this question, Jiang Ningxue's heart was filled with regret and self-blame. Her tone was bitter. If she had known that Ji Tianxing was so monstrous that he could defeat Qin Songqiong and become the #1 genius, she definitely would not have rejected Ji Tianxing's offer. If she had known that the sword was not a sword, but a divine dragon, she was willing to accompany Ji Tianxing for a lifetime, let alone for a night. However, there were no ifs. Ji Tianxing neither admitted nor denied it. He said calmly, "Young Lady Jiang, let bygones be bygones. You don't have to take it to heart. Whether that sword was transformed from the black dragon or not, it has nothing to do with you, right?" After he finished speaking, he turned and walked through the gates of Heaven's Saint Palace. Such a casual reply and such a cold attitude caused Jiang Ningxue's heart to ache. "Young Master Ji," she called out in a sorrowful voice and was about to chase after him. However, Heaven's Saint Palace was a forbidden area. Outsiders were not allowed to enter. 2 golden-armored guards stepped forward and blocked her path with their treasured swords. She could only stop and look at Ji Tianxing through the gates. Unknowingly, 2 streams of tears fell from the corners of her eyes and rolled down her pale cheeks. She endured the pain in her heart and covered her cheeks with her hands. She turned and left in a daze. Once, she was so close to Ji Tianxing and could touch that black dragon. But now, she was a stranger to Ji Tianxing. Chapter 1623. Ji Tianxing returned to the east courtyard of Heaven's Saint Palace and sat in his room to meditate. When night fell, a guard came to report that divine envoy Lin had come to visit. Ji Tianxing got up and walked out of his room to the guest hall. Lin Daoyi was sitting in the living room, drinking tea, his face filled with a gratified smile. As soon as he saw Ji Tianxing, he stood up and clasped his hands together to congratulate him. "Tianxing, congratulations on winning first place and becoming the top god's disciple this year." Ji Tianxing nodded and returned the greeting. "Thank you, divine envoy Lin." Lin Daoyi did not waste any time and went straight to the point. "I know that your time is precious, so let's cut to the chase. I'm here on the orders of the Great Guardian to give you your reward. Here are 200 million spiritual stones worth of cultivation resources, including elixirs, incantations, secret books, and so on." Lin Daoyi took out a black space ring and handed it to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said playfully, "Previously, the Great Guardian said that he would give out 500 million spiritual stones worth of cultivation resources to the top 5 gods' disciples. I thought it would be 100 million each. Why is it that my reward is 200 million spiritual stones worth of cultivation resources?" Lin Daoyi smiled. "Tianxing, the Great Guardian did give out 500 million spiritual stones worth of cultivation resources, but he did not give it to the 5 of you equally. The 5 of you have different rankings, so you will receive different rewards. As the top god's disciple, you will receive the most generous reward of 200 million spiritual stones. The 5th god's disciple will receive the least reward of 300 million spiritual stones." "I see." Ji Tianxing nodded and took the space ring. He used his divine sense to check the contents of the ring. There were mountains of cultivation resources in the space ring, and they were divided into 3 areas. In the first area, there were more than 100 exquisite white jade bottles. There were all kinds of elixirs and medicines that could be used to treat injuries, to assist in cultivation, and to increase one's power. In the second area, there were more than a dozen cultivation technique manuals, array diagrams, pill manuals, and so on. All of them were primordial spirit upper grade and supreme grade cultivation techniques. In the third area, there were more than 40 million spiritual stones piled up like a small green mountain, emitting a dazzling light. With so many cultivation resources, it was enough for Ji Tianxing to cultivate in seclusion for 2 years. In addition to the universal treasure box that Hong Qingtian had given him, he would not have to worry about cultivation resources for the next few years. After all, the treasures and resources in the universal treasure box were worth more than 200 million. Ji Tianxing put away the spatial ring and cupped his hands towards Lin Daoyi. Many thanks, Divine Envoy Lin. Thank you for your trouble. Lin Daoyi smiled and returned the greeting. He cupped his hands and said, Then I won't disturb you any longer. Farewell. With that, he turned and walked out of the hall, leaving the eastern courtyard. After sending off Lin Daoyi, Ji Tianxing returned to the secret room and put the spiritual stones and cultivation resources into his spatial ring. After organizing these cultivation resources, he sat down in the secret room to cultivate. A few hours later, it was dawn. Ji Tianxing was cultivating when Qian Yu's voice suddenly sounded in his mind. Old Ji, come to the sword world quickly. There's a new situation. Qian Yu's tone was urgent and also carried a hint of joy. Ji Tianxing hurriedly stopped cultivating and took out the burial of heaven. With a flash of light, he entered the sword world and appeared in the sky above Anshui City. He stood in the sky and looked down at Anshui City. He saw that Anshui City, which was originally a few dozen miles wide, had now expanded to 100 miles wide. There had only been a few thousand Earth Spirit citizens in the city, but now there were about 2,000. The city was even more majestic, and the buildings in the city were even more dignified. In a mountain range 100 miles away from the city, there was a towering ancient tree that was more than 10,000 feet tall. Billions of lush branches and leaves covered a radius of a few dozen miles, emitting green with spiritual qi that soared to the sky. Without a doubt, this was the green light treasure tree, the body of ancestor Sanju. Ji Tianxing observed for a while and didn't find anything out of the ordinary. At this time, Qian Yu and the Jinshan king flew out of the city lord's mansion. In the blink of an eye, Qian Yu and the Jinshan king arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. Greetings, young Master Ji. The Jinshan king bowed and greeted. Ji Tianxing slightly nodded and asked, Qian Yu, what happened? Qian Yu pointed to the northeast sky and said, Old Ji, there's a change in that mysterious forbidden area. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and thought, Kenshin's Yang tomb? Did something happen? Thinking of this, he ordered Qian Yu, take me there. Thus, Qian Yu carried him and the Jinshan king and flew through the sky at lightning speed, rushing towards the northeast. About 4 hours later, Qian Yu flew more than 20,000 miles away. In a rolling primitive mountain range, there was a valley with a radius of more than 200 miles. This valley was the location of Kenshin's Yang tomb. Not long after Kenshin's Yang tomb appeared, Ji Tianxing came here once. At that time, a few dozen miles north of the valley was a dark and cold void, which was also the end of the sword world. Now, Ji Tianxing looked around and found that the dark void was at the end of the northern horizon. The distance from Kenshin's Yang tomb to the end of the sword world was at least 1,000 miles. In just a few months, the sword world has expanded by another 1,000 miles? This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind and he was quite surprised. Soon, Qian Yu carried him and the Jinshan king to the vicinity of the valley. He looked down at the valley from above and saw that the valley with a radius of 200 miles was completely covered by a 7-colored light shield. The light barrier was very thick and solid, blooming with dazzling 7-colored divine light and emitting terrifying divine power fluctuations. A few months ago, when Ji Tianxing came here for the first time, the light barrier was only 100 miles wide. Now, the light barrier had expanded to a radius of 200 miles, completely covering the entire valley. Not only that, but the thickness of the light barrier had increased by several times, making it impossible to see what was inside. Even the energy fluctuations emitted by the light barrier were more powerful and terrifying. No one could get within 10 miles of the valley, or else they would be injured by the invisible divine power. Ji Tianxing, Qian Yu, and the Jinshan king could only stop a dozen miles away and look at the valley from afar. Qian Yu frowned and said in a serious tone, Old Ji, the sword world is constantly expanding, and so is this divine array. Its power is also increasing. I was worried that there would be a problem, so I called for you to come take a look. Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a serious expression, there shouldn't be any problems for now. The burial of heaven's power is constantly recovering, so the sword world will naturally expand. Chapter 1624. Ji Tianxing circled the Yang tomb a few times and carefully observed it for a long time. Just as he said, as the sword world expanded, the divine formation protecting the Yang tomb was also recovering its power. The formation's power was gradually recovering and the energy fluctuations were also stabilizing. Perhaps the Yang tomb within the formation had also undergone some changes. Unfortunately, the seven-colored light barrier was solid and couldn't be seen through by the naked eye. Ji Tianxing tried to use his consciousness to probe, but he couldn't even get close to the formation, let alone see the situation inside the tomb. He was a bit worried and thought to himself, the defensive formation is getting stronger and stronger, it will definitely recover its power in the future. With my strength and methods, it's almost impossible to break the formation and enter Kenshin's Yang tomb. It seems that the only way to enter Kenshin's Yang tomb is the burial of heaven's method. I need to gather enough materials as soon as possible and help it repair the sword so that it can help me open the formation. An hour later, Ji Tianxing left with Qian Yu and the Jinshan king after seeing that there was nothing wrong with the defensive formation. On the way back, he saw that Qian Yu and the Jinshan king were worried and comforted them. Don't worry, there won't be any problems with the formation. The sword world is constantly expanding and the world's spiritual energy and all kinds of cultivation resources are becoming more and more abundant. You can't slack off, you must work harder to cultivate and increase your strength. The Jinshan king nodded in agreement. Qian Yu curled his lips and said gloomily, Old Ji, the changes in the sword world have greatly benefited them. The Jinshan king buried several mineral veins in the mountains outside the city and has been cultivating in them, increasing his strength very quickly. The little black dragon occupied a spirit spring and cultivates in it all day long. Even old ancestor Sanju occupied a spirit vein and transformed into a towering ancient tree to absorb the world's spiritual energy. I'm the only one who hasn't found a suitable place to cultivate. Qian Yu's tone was full of grievances and was a bit unhappy. Ji Tianxing and the Jinshan king both laughed. Qian Yu was even more depressed and said unhappily, Humph! You're still laughing, don't have any sympathy. I don't care, old Ji. You have to help me find a good place to cultivate. Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, The sword world is so big, where am I going to find a cultivation treasure for you? Go look for it yourself. Walk around the sword world a few more times and you might be able to find the treasure land that you want. If you really can't find it, go to the vicinity of that valley. There's a divine grade great formation there, and the heaven and earth spirit chi in the vicinity is exceptionally dense. It's not inferior to the spirit vein treasure lands. Qian Yu thought for a moment and felt that it was reasonable, so he nodded and agreed. Ji Tianxing left the sword world and returned to the secret room. At this time, the sky was already bright. He stood up and walked out of the secret chamber, heading towards the western courtyard of Heaven's Saint Palace. Yesterday, after the end of the God-disciple assessment, Hong Chengtian told him that he had something to discuss with him when he had time. 15 minutes later, Ji Tianxing entered the western courtyard. Under the lead of the guard, he arrived at the courtyard where Hong Chengtian lived. At this time, Hong Chengtian was sitting on the roof of the palace as usual, meditating. He wore a pure white long robe, and his face was peaceful and peaceful. Every breath he took caused the clouds to fill the sky and the morning sun to rise. The golden morning sun shone on his body, making him look like a celestial being. His temperament was ethereal, divine, and dignified. Ji Tianxing waited in the courtyard for half an hour before Hong Chengtian finished his cultivation. He flew down from the roof and landed in the courtyard. Tianxing, it's rare for you to be so considerate, coming to find me so early in the morning. Hong Chengtian greeted Ji Tianxing and laughed heartily. The two of them sat at the stone table under the tree, drinking tea as they talked about serious matters. Elder Hong, yesterday you said that you had something to discuss with me. What is it? Hong Chengtian smiled as he stroked his beard and said, In the past few months, I've sent people to gather Xian Bing and Earth Core fire crystals. Now, I've finally gathered them. I came here today to ask when you have time to help me set it up. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, Since the materials are gathered, it'll be easy. I have time today, and I'll be able to set it up quickly. That's great, then let's begin. Hong Chengtian was quite happy, and he quickly pulled him into the secret room for cultivation. After entering the secret room, Hong Chengtian opened his space ring, took out 2 treasure boxes, and handed them to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing took the treasure boxes, opened them, and saw that they contained earth core fire crystals and outer xianbing. One of them was lit with a dark red flame, and it emitted a vast and mighty fire spiritual qi. The other one was light white, and it emitted a bone-chilling cold. After confirming that the materials were correct, Ji Tianxing took out hundreds of spiritual stones and started to set up a formation in the secret room. He arranged the hundreds of spiritual stones according to a special position and embedded them on the floor of the secret room, forming a special pattern. After arranging the spiritual stones, he took out the earth core fire crystals and outer xianbing and embedded them in the formation. Hong Chengtian stood at the side and watched quietly. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was very skilled in setting up the formation, his eyes shone brightly, and he was quite pleased and surprised. After about 4 hours, Ji Tianxing finished setting up the formation. The formation was 3 meters in radius, and the pattern on the outside looked like a blooming lotus. The earth core fire crystals and outer xianbing were embedded in the stamen of the flower, and they emitted a dark red and light white brilliance, which was especially gorgeous. After Ji Tianxing cast a spell to activate the formation, the entire lotus lit up with a dazzling 5-colored brilliance, and it formed a lotus-like throne. Elder Hong, from now on, you'll cultivate in this formation. Persevere for 2 years, and your injuries will be completely healed, and you'll quickly recover your strength. When Hong Chengtian heard that, his face was full of anticipation, and he asked excitedly, Tianxing, what kind of formation are you setting up? Why have I never seen such a formation before? Does it really have such a miraculous effect? Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, this formation is called the All-Seeing Thousand Spirits formation. It's a special formation from the ancient times, and it hasn't been passed down to the world. Hong Chengtian was even more surprised when he heard that, and his eyes shone even brighter. He asked, a special formation from the ancient times? You're so young, so how did you learn such a profound and exquisite formation? Could it be, your clan or sect is a great clan that has been passed down since the ancient times? Ji Tianxing hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile, Elder Hong, you're thinking too much. How can it be so mysterious? I just accidentally learned the inheritance of an ancient powerhouse, and that's how I mastered this formation. Hong Chengtian was suddenly enlightened and he exclaimed, so that's how it is. No wonder your talent is so monstrous, and you know so many mysterious techniques and secret techniques. No wonder. Before this, he had always been curious about Ji Tianxing's background. The Great Guardian had also discussed this with him, but he had no clue. Chapter 1625. Ever since Ji Tianxing came to Mount God's ceiling, he had been in the limelight for the past 6 months. He had also created many miracles. He was very clear in his heart that his performance was too monstrous, and it would definitely arouse the suspicions of everyone. Due to his identity as the son of the oracle, the guardians and oracles would not blatantly investigate his identity and background. However, they would still be suspicious. Sooner or later, they would find a chance to investigate his background. Hence, he was mentally prepared. He had also thought of an excuse. When Hong Chengtian asked about his background, he admitted that he had learned the legacy of an ancient expert. In this way, the doubts of Hong Chengtian, the Great Guardian, and the few oracles were easily solved. Ji Tianxing chatted with Hong Chengtian for a while more before he bowed and left. Hong Chengtian did not ask him to stay. After sending him off, he sat on the lotus throne and started to recuperate. The effects of the all-seeing thousand spirits array were indeed extraordinary. Very soon he could feel the effects. The hidden injuries that he had suffered for many years were also quickly alleviating and fading away. His body condition became more stable and normal. His magic power was also recovering quickly. Previously, Ji Tianxing had told him that he could use 2 types of materials to set up an array to help him recover from his injuries and powers within 2 years. At that time, he could not believe it. He felt that it was unbelievable. Now, he had personally experienced the effects of the array. He was very excited and pleased. He finally believed Ji Tianxing's words. He was looking forward to the day when his powers were fully recovered. After Ji Tianxing left the west courtyard, he returned to the east courtyard. He entered a secret chamber and started to cultivate in seclusion. The great guardian had said that he, Wu Kei, and the rest had 2 months to rest. After 2 months, Mount God Sealing would escort the 5 gods' disciples to participate in the exchange meeting between the 3 holy kingdoms. Although Ji Tianxing desperately wanted to see Yun Yao, he did not know where the exchange meeting would take place. However, he didn't know where the conference would be held, so he could only wait patiently for another 2 months. During this period, he could cultivate the Sword Soul Dao in seclusion to strengthen his martial arts foundation and increase his powers. The flow of time in the secret chamber was 5 times faster than the outside world. Moreover, he had an abundance of cultivation resources. This allowed him to cultivate with twice the result with half the effort, and his progress was extremely fast. Unknowingly, he had been cultivating for 10 days, and his power was steadily increasing. 10 days in the secret room was only 2 days in the outside world. Early in the morning, there were already 41 young geniuses gathered at the square outside the temple. Many of them were injured, and they looked rather miserable. Everyone's mood was very low. Their eyes were filled with pessimism and despair. Everything was gloomy. After all, they were once outstanding geniuses of their respective empires and had a bright future ahead of them. Now that they had failed the test, they would be sent to the Glacier Divine Mine to work as overseers and miners. The atmosphere in the square was very oppressive. Everyone was silent and did not say a word. After a long time, the Great Guardian brought the 2 divine envoys to the square. The Great Guardian said a few simple words and then asked the 2 divine envoys to escort everyone away. The 2 divine envoys took out a black flying boat and let the 41 geniuses board the boat one by one. Not long after, the black flying boat flew into the sky, carrying everyone to the north at lightning speed. At the same time, in the south of the Chu Yun Empire, in a vast and desolate primitive mountain range that was as vast as the sea, there was a giant mountain peak that was 3,000 feet tall. The giant mountain peak was very steep. The trees on the mountain were lush and green, and the heaven and earth spirit chi was especially abundant. Above the waist of the mountain, it was covered by white clouds. The mountain peak was filled with towering ancient trees. The branches and leaves were luxuriant, and the wind could not pass through. On the surface, the mountain peak maintained its primitive appearance. There were no traces of humans stepping on it. But in reality, there were a few small 2-story buildings hidden under the cover of the towering ancient trees. The 4 small buildings were made of requiem wood. They were completely black and were protected by a powerful saint-level array. An invisible array with a radius of 3,000 feet enveloped the 4 small buildings. Outside the array, there was no trace of it at all. Only after entering the array could one see the few small buildings and a spacious courtyard. At this moment, a handsome young man in a golden robe was sitting at a stone table in the courtyard, drinking wine with a depressed expression. Sitting in front of him was a white-robed, white-haired old man with a sage-like demeanor. He was the Outcloud Empire's sage master. The golden-robed young man drank a few mouthfuls of wine and said with a frown, "Sage master, I've had enough. How long do we have to stay in this damned place?" The sage master had a calm expression and said calmly, "Your Highness, please calm down. Just bear with it for a while longer. The sage master will be able to find a result soon." The golden-robed crown prince snorted and said irritably, "We gave up on the flourishing imperial city and actually hid in this godforsaken place. I really don't know what father is thinking." There is not a single person to be seen within a radius of several 100,000 miles. It has been more than 3 months. Sage Master, you say it's soon every time? But how long do we have to wait? I wonder if those few beloved concubines of mine are still alive right now. The imperial palace has been attacked by experts from various countries. I wonder if the imperial guards and garrison troops have been able to defend it? Hearing the crown prince raise these questions, the sage master picked up his teacup without a change in expression. He lowered his head and drank silently, not replying. There were some things that anyone with a bit of intelligence would be able to guess. Unfortunately, the Crown Prince was not smart and far-sighted, so the Sage Master could only hide it from him. If he told the Crown Prince the truth, it would be even more difficult for him to bear with his current life. Thinking of this, the Sage Master forced out a smile and persuaded, "Your Highness, the Sage Master's grand scheme and plan is not something you and I can guess. You only have to wait patiently for the day the Sage Master returns to the Imperial City and unifies the 6 countries. At that time, the Sage Master will be the #1 person below the Divine Master, and you will be the new Sage Master. You will definitely shine brightly in the world and dominate the 4 seas." The Crown Prince finally heard something that was pleasing to the ear. His heart was filled with anticipation as he said with a flushed face, "The Sage Master is right. Although I can't help Father, I will fully support Father's plan. Just bear with it a little longer. There will be a result soon." As he spoke, the Crown Prince stood up shakily and staggered away. He returned to the house in a drunken stupor and fell asleep on the bed. Seeing this scene, the Sage Master couldn't help but secretly shake his head. His heart was filled with sorrow. The Sage Master is so wise and domineering. How could he give birth to such a frivolous son? It is said that a loving mother leads to a useless son. If the Sage Master didn't always spoil the Crown Prince, he wouldn't have become like this. Just as he was secretly muttering in his heart, a muffled bang suddenly sounded from the wooden house to the left of the courtyard. The Sage Master subconsciously turned his head and saw a golden palm fly out from the wooden house, destroying a window and half a wall. What's going on? What is the Sage Master doing? Chapter 1626. As soon as the Sage Master flew into the wooden building, he saw the mess in the hall. Emperor Chu Yun stood in the middle of the hall with an ashen face. His entire body was filled with cold anger. Originally, there was a stone table and a stone stool beside him. In the past 3 months, he often sat here to study the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Now, the stone table and stool had been reduced to rubble, scattered all over the messy hall. The ground and walls were shattered and filled with cracks and holes. The Heaven's Burial sword that was as black as ink was stabbed into the northern wall. It was deeply embedded into the wood and was still trembling without end. The Sage Master understood at a glance. The Sage Master must have thrown the Sword of Burial of Heaven out of anger and smashed the table and stool. He also destroyed a wall along the way. "Sage Master, please calm down. This matter cannot be rushed." The Sage Master hurriedly persuaded him calmly. He walked to the northern wall and pulled out the Sword of Burial of Heaven. "Sage Master, the Sword of Burial of Heaven is Kenshin's personal sword. It's the #1 divine weapon in the world. It's extraordinary. With our abilities, it's understandable that we can't unravel its secrets." The Sage Master persuaded as he carried the Sword of Burial of Heaven back to Emperor Chu Yun. However, Emperor Chu Yun didn't reach out to take it. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot, and his anger became even more violent. "Bastard! Ji Tianxing, that damned bastard. He should die 10 times. I'm going to kill his entire family." Emperor Chu Yun gritted his teeth and cursed. He was so angry that his face was distorted. He was on the verge of going berserk. The Sage Master had never seen him so angry before. He immediately felt that something was wrong and hurriedly asked, "Sage Master, why do you say that? What the hell is going on?" Emperor Chu Yun took 2 deep breaths and gradually suppressed his anger. He shouted in a deep voice, "Take a closer look at that sword." The Sage Master didn't know what was going on. He lowered his head to look at the treasured sword in his hand and frowned. On the surface, the treasured sword was pitch black like ink. It was ice cold to the touch and emitted an ancient aura. It was extremely normal. The tip of the sword was broken, but there was nothing wrong with the gap. It looked no different from before. However, the Sage Master vaguely felt that something was amiss. He sensed it with his heart and noticed that the treasured sword was icy cold and deathly still, and it was filled with a deathly aura. But how could this be? Previously, this treasured sword clearly had a wisp of spiritual aura, as if it was a living thing. The Sage Master furrowed his white brows, vaguely understanding the key issue. He raised his head to look at Emperor Chu Yun and asked in disbelief, "Saint Emperor, is this sword?" "That's right." Great Emperor Chu Yun nodded and said coldly, "This sword is fake. This isn't the real burial of heaven." The Sage Master was immediately filled with shock. He said in disbelief, "This is impossible. When Ji Tianxing presented this sword to us, we checked it carefully. There is no mistake." Great Emperor Chu Yun said expressionlessly, "Ever since I obtained this sword, I've been studying it day and night. I've thought of all sorts of ways, but I still couldn't figure out its secret. Although the appearance of this sword hasn't changed at all, it's exactly the same as the real burial of heaven. However, in the past 2 months, the spiritual aura in the sword has been weakening and becoming thinner and thinner. Until yesterday, the spiritual aura in the treasured sword had completely dissipated. This sword has also become an ordinary primordial soul stage Dharma treasure. It's lifeless and doesn't have any spiritual aura." At this point, Great Emperor Chu Yun's eyes shone with a cold light. He said coldly, "If I'm not wrong, this sword must be a fake forged by Ji Tianxing. That damnable beast, it's absolutely impossible for him to offer the true heaven-burying sword to this emperor." The Sage Master understood the reason, and his face turned gloomy. He said in a venomous tone, "If that's the case, didn't that despicable bastard Ji Tianxing use a fake sword to cause us to give up the imperial city and the entire empire?" Great Emperor Chu Yun didn't say anything. His eyes shone with a cold light, and his entire body emitted a murderous aura. He was so humiliated that he almost went berserk. Ji Tianxing had only used a fake sword to cause the Chu Yun Empire to be besieged by 5 other empires. He and the Sage Master had given up the imperial city, causing the Chu Yun Empire to fall apart and be on the verge of collapse. If this matter were to spread, all the cultivators in the world would laugh their heads off. Great Emperor Chu Yun's name would also spread throughout the world and become the laughingstock of the entire vast divine kingdom. At this thought, Great Emperor Chu Yun was so humiliated that he almost vomited blood. The Sage Master was also furious. However, he could still suppress his anger and maintain a trace of rationality and calmness. After pondering for a moment, he said in a low voice, "Sage Master, since we've confirmed that this sword is fake, we have to act as soon as possible to recover our losses. For the past 3 months, I've received news from the various branches of the Shadow Squad every day, so I know the Empire's situation like the back of my hand." Great Emperor Chu Yun said expressionlessly, "What's the current situation of the Empire?" The Sage Master said in a low voice, "The Imperial City has been destroyed by the other empires, and most of the citizens have fled the Imperial City. Now, the various northwestern regions have fallen and been annexed by the Great Qian Empire. The 5 eastern regions have also fallen and been forcefully occupied by the White Knight Empire. The 4 western regions have been annexed by the Thousand Snow Empire and have been embroiled in war for the past 2 months. Many cities and the old subordinates of the Sage Master are still resisting tenaciously. Nearly half of the Empire's 28 regions have fallen, and only a few regions in the central and southern regions are still struggling to hold on. If the Sage Master doesn't take action, I'm afraid those regions won't be able to hold on for long and will fall soon." Although Great Emperor Chu Yun had expected that the entire empire would be in chaos after he left for 3 months, he didn't expect that the empire would fall into chaos. However, he didn't expect the 5 empires' attacks to be so fierce and swift. In just 3 months, the imperial city has been destroyed, and half of the territory has fallen. The 5 empires are really ruthless. Great Emperor Chu Yun's eyes were bloodshot with anger, and his body was burning with dark red murderous flames. "Sage Master, do you have any countermeasures?" The Sage Master frowned and thought for a moment before saying, "Originally, I was planning to hand over this fake sword and let the other empires fight over it, causing internal strife and chaos. However, this sword has lost its spiritual aura, so it's easy to distinguish between the real and the fake. This method won't work, so we have to think of another way." Great Emperor Chu Yun said coldly, "So, you don't have a good plan for the time being?" The Sage Master nodded silently and said, "Please give me a few more days, Sage Master. I'll contact the Anying Hall and my old subordinates and think of another way." Great Emperor Chu Yun nodded slightly and said with murderous intent, "We'll think of a long-term plan to recover the lost territory. However, I must first kill Ji Tianxing and obtain the real sword of the burial of heaven. Immediately send an order to the Anying Hall and have them send their elites to ambush Ji Tianxing near Mount God Bestowment and wait for an opportunity. It would be better if they could capture him alive." Chapter 1627. Unknowingly, more than a month had passed. 50 days had passed in the outside world, but Ji Tianxing had been cultivating in the secret chamber for more than 8 months. After this period of seclusion, his strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, increasing by 2 times. He had already cultivated the 4th level of the Sword Soul Dao to the greater success stage, and his primordial spirit was extremely powerful. His strength had reached the peak of the 7th level of the primordial spirit realm. As long as he broke through a bottleneck, he would be able to step into the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm. At that time, he would truly be invincible under the tribulation stage. Originally, he wanted to cultivate in seclusion in the secret chamber and strive to break through the bottleneck. He wanted to reach the 8th level of the primordial spirit realm before leaving Sacred Seal Mountain. However, someone knocked on the door of the secret chamber early in the morning. Ji Tianxing was awakened. After finishing his cultivation and walking out of the secret chamber, he realized that the person knocking on the door was a guard from the East Court. The golden-armored guard bowed respectfully and handed over a jade slip with both hands. "Young Master Ji, this is a communication jade slip for you. Before your seclusion, you instructed me to wake you up if I received this jade slip." Ji Tianxing took the communication jade slip and looked at it. He saw a mysterious imprint on it. In the imprint, there was a towering mountain peak, like a giant sword that stood between heaven and earth. On top of the mountain peak, there was a vast sea of clouds, and a bright moon hung in the sky. Back then, the identity token that Ji Bai took out had such an imprint on it, representing the pillar of heaven's mountains. Ji Tianxing waved his hand, indicating for the guard to leave. Then, he used his consciousness to enter the jade slip and read the message inside. "Master, this subordinate awaits your arrival in Hui City. There is an elder who wishes to meet you. Please come and meet him." There was only one sentence in the jade slip. It was concise and to the point, just like Ji Bai's tone and style. Back then, when Ji Tianxing returned to Sacred Seal Mountain from the Glacier Divine Mine, he had asked Ji Bai to wait at the foot of the mountain. The two of them had agreed that if there was anything important, they would communicate through the jade slip. Ji Bai, this fellow, actually ran to Hui City? An elder of his wants to meet me? What elder? Could it be a descendant of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountains? Ji Tianxing put away the jade slip, frowned and pondered for a moment. Then he made up his mind. He walked out of the Heaven Saint Palace East Courtyard and left the God Sealing Mountain, rushing towards Hui City at lightning speed. Hui City was the closest bustling city to Mount God Bestowment. The distance between the two was more than 10,000 kilometers. At such a close distance, Ji Tianxing only used 2 hours to reach the city gates of Hui City. Hui City was situated in the middle of a mountain range, atop a towering mountain peak that was over 3,000 meters tall. This city had a radius of 100 miles and had a history of over 2,000 years. The black city walls and the majestic city gates exuded an ancient aura. Ji Tianxing passed through the heavily guarded city gate and was inspected by the city guards. He paid a few spirit stones before he was allowed to enter the city. As soon as he entered the city, he walked on a straight and wide road. At this moment, a young man dressed in cotton clothes and wearing a bamboo hat quickly caught up with him. "Master, please come with me." Hearing this familiar voice, Ji Tianxing turned his head and saw an unfamiliar face under the bamboo hat. On the surface, the face was dark yellow, like an ordinary person or a woodcutter. However, Ji Tianxing recognized that pair of deep and sharp eyes. It was Ji Bai. "Heh, you still want to disguise yourself? Why are you so mysterious?" Ji Tianxing revealed a smile and communicated with him through voice transmission. Ji Bai led him into a small alley. As they shuttled through the complicated alleys, he explained, "We, the people of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, always pay attention to concealment and concealment. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for us to survive until today." Ji Tianxing frowned and asked doubtfully, "Ji Bai, what do you mean? Could it be that there are some experts and forces that have been dealing with the people of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains? This matter you will naturally know in the future," Ji Bai replied. Obviously, he did not dare to reveal any information. Not long after, the two of them came to the end of a dark and damp alley and entered an old house. The house was not big. The courtyard and the layout of the house were ordinary and did not attract any attention. It was probably because the house had been empty for too many years that weeds grew in the courtyard. After years of disrepair, the roof tiles were broken and some places even leaked water. Ji Bai brought Ji Tianxing into a simple and unadorned study. The door was half closed. A thin, white-haired old man wearing a black robe was standing in front of the window, quietly looking at the flower bed outside. The old man's back was facing the door of the study. Only his thin back and long white hair could be seen. Ji Bai entered the study and stood still. He respectfully bowed and said, "Fourth Elder, I have brought the guest." The black-robed old man had probably been waiting for a long time. When he heard this, he immediately turned around and looked at Ji Tianxing with a burning gaze. He did not open his mouth to speak. His pair of bright eyes stared at Ji Tianxing. He actually lost his mind and stood there blankly. However, his face was covered by a black iron mask. His expression could not be seen. Ji Tianxing was also silent. He quietly looked at him. After a long time, the black-robed old man came back to his senses. He emotionally sighed and said, "Similar. Really too similar. If not for this old man's mental preparation, I'm afraid that this old man would have personally come." His voice was trembling. His eyes were complicated. There was a bit of nostalgia, reminiscence, and sadness. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianxing could vaguely guess the reason. Soon after, the black-robed old man calmed his emotions. He cupped his hands towards Ji Tianxing and said, "This old man, Feng Ping, greets young Master Ji." Ji Tianxing nodded his head and cupped his hands. "Elder Feng is too polite. Young Master Ji, please sit down and talk." Feng Ping extended his hand and gestured for him to sit. After Ji Tianxing sat down, Ji Bai stood guard by his side. At this time, Feng Ping added, "Young Master Ji, you should still call this old man Fourth Elder." Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Fourth Elder, everyone here is on the same side. Can you take off your mask and show your true face?" Feng Ping was startled. He hurriedly took off the mask on his face and laughed self-mockingly. This old man lost his composure for a moment. "I've made a fool of myself in front of young Master Ji." After he took off the mask, a weather-beaten face with an aura of vicissitudes was revealed. Ji Tianxing could clearly see that there was a deep scar on his forehead and the left side of his face. It was like a scar that was cut by a sharp blade. Even so, Feng Ping's face did not show any malevolence. There was still some gentleness and benevolence. After the two exchanged a few pleasantries, Feng Ping began to talk business. "Young Master Ji, this old man came to Hui City on the orders of the Great Immortal to discuss some matters with you face to face. This old man knows that you possess the Sword of Burial of Heaven. It seems that you have also inherited the Sword Dao legacy of the Great Immortal." Chapter 1628. Ji Tianxing did not expect Francis to be so direct. The two of them had never met before, and Francis wanted to see the Sword of Burial of Heaven the moment they met. This request was obviously a little abrupt. Ji Tianxing frowned and said calmly, "Fourth Elder, I understand what you mean. You want to confirm whether I have the real Sword of Burial of Heaven. However, the Sword of Burial of Heaven is Kenshin's sword and has been missing for thousands of years. Forgive me for being blunt, but even if I take out the Sword of Burial of Heaven and show it to you, how can you tell whether it is real or fake? What's the difference between seeing it and not seeing it?" Francis's request was rejected, but he was not angry and still maintained a pleasant attitude. He revealed a smile and explained sincerely, Young Master Ji, the great deity naturally has his reasons for sending me here. More than 1,000 years ago, the Grandmasters sat at the pillar of heaven's mountains and challenged all the martial saints in the world. At that time, there were not many people who followed the Grandmaster, only the great deity and a few martial uncles. Fortunately, I was also on the pillar of heaven's mountains back then. Although I was only a Taoist child then, helping the great deity to look after the great deity's furnace fire. However, I have seen the Grandmaster many times and have seen the sword of burial of heaven with my own eyes many times. Hearing Francis's words, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked with interest, "May I ask how old you are?" Fourth elder, 1,558 years old. Francis replied without any hesitation. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly. He thought for a while and realized that the facts were basically the same. However, to be safe, he still used his divine thought and secretly awakened the sword of burial of heaven. The sword of burial of heaven. You should have seen this Francis before. Do you still remember him? The sword of burial of heaven said calmly, "After more than 1,000 years, my memories are incomplete. How can I remember these unimportant people?" Ji Tianxing was full of helplessness, but he couldn't force anything. At this moment, Francis looked at him with a burning gaze and said sincerely, "Young Master Ji, don't worry. This old man and the entire pillar of heaven's mountains have no ill intentions towards you. Kenshin is our spiritual leader, our eternal ancestor. This old man only wishes to take a look at Grandmaster's remains and complete the task that the great immortal has given me. I hope that young Master Ji can fulfill my wish." Seeing that Francis' tone and expression were filled with sincerity and desire, Ji Tianxing considered for a moment before finally nodding his head in agreement. "I can show you, but you have to tell me first, who is this great immortal you're talking about?" Without hesitation, Francis answered, 1,500 years ago, the great immortal's Taoist name was Huang Long Taoist. He had always been by his Grandmaster's side, managing the matters of the pillar of heaven's mountains. 1,000 years ago, after the fall of the martial ancestor, the world was shaken. Many thieves took the opportunity to invade the pillar of heaven's mountains. The pillar of heaven's mountains suffered a great calamity. A few uncle masters and the experts in the sect all died in battle. Only the great immortal Huang Long and the few of us survived. From then on, the great immortal became our leader, leading us to protect the last legacy of the pillar of heaven's mountains. The great immortal once said that the great immortal was the divine king of the 9 heavens and could not truly fall. There will be a day when the great immortal returns and reappears in the world. Ji Tianxing listened attentively, and some images involuntarily appeared in his mind. In his memory, when Kenshin was overseeing the pillar of heaven's mountains, there was a middle-aged Taoist wearing an apricot-yellow Taoist robe beside him. Now that he thought about it, that yellow-robed Taoist should be the great immortal Huang Long that Francis mentioned. After a moment, Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts and extended his right palm in front of Francis. Swoosh! A black light flashed in his palm, and an ancient sword that was as black as ink appeared. It was the sword of burial of heaven. The moment Francis saw the sword of burial of heaven, his body stiffened and he was stunned on the spot. His eyes were fixed on the heaven burier sword. His eyes were shining brightly, and the rims of his eyes turned red. His gaze and expression became extremely complicated as his emotions fluctuated violently. It is indeed the sword of burial of heaven. After more than 1,000 years, I can still see it with my own eyes. I can die with no regrets. Francis murmured softly as he extended both hands slowly and held the sword of burial of heaven in his palms. He rubbed it gently as though he was greeting an old friend. I still remember that I was still a boy guarding the elixir furnace back then. There was once when the great immortal was refining the 7-night soul ascension elixir and needed to maintain the fire in the furnace for 49 days. I persisted for 46 days and finally could not hold on any longer. I actually fainted in the elixir chamber. Francis mumbled to himself as he recounted the past. On his aged face, a faint smile could be seen. That cauldron of 7-night soul ascension elixir was destroyed. The great immortal was furious and wanted to severely punish me, a derelict Dao boy. At the crucial moment, it was the sword of burial of heaven that stopped the great immortal and sent him away, allowing me to avoid punishment. When he said this, the sword of burial of heaven vibrated slightly and bounced his hands away. The voice of the sword of burial of heaven came from the sword. It said with a strange tone, "Little one, after more than 1,000 years, you actually still remember this small matter? Even if you want to thank me, you don't have to hold me so intimately. Where is your decency?" The sudden voice made Francis's body tremble and he was immediately petrified on the spot. He stared at the sword of burial of heaven in a daze. His eyes were wide open and his face was filled with disbelief. After a long while, he recovered and asked in an extremely agitated tone, "Senior burial of heaven? Is it really you? You're actually still alive?" He was so agitated that his face flushed red. He rubbed his hands repeatedly and even spoke incoherently. Ji Tianxing glanced at Francis with a strange expression and thought to himself, "Little one? An old man who has lived for more than 1,000 years? Isn't this a little too out of place?" However, after thinking for a while, he felt relieved. Back then, when Francis was a Dao boy on the Pillar of Heaven's mountains, he was only a little over 10 years old. To the sword of burial of heaven, he was indeed a little one. At this moment, the voice of the sword of burial of heaven sounded again. "Xiao Budian, have your martial uncles all passed away?" Francis took a few deep breaths before his emotions calmed down. He hurriedly nodded and said, "Other than the great immortal yellow dragon, those martial uncles have all died in battle. Now, only the great immortal is leading us and guarding the Pillar of Heaven's mountains." The sword of burial of heaven was silent for a moment and said in a low and vigorous tone, "It's all right. One day, the Pillar of Heaven's mountains will regain its glory. Those who had once invaded the Pillar of Heaven's mountains will pay the price in blood." Francis nodded repeatedly, his eyes surging with excitement and anticipation. He said in a certain tone, "Senior burial of heaven, I also believe that that day will come very soon." The sword of burial of heaven instructed again in a solemn tone, "Go back and tell Huang Long that Ji Tianxing is the successor of the Kenshin and also the new owner of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. Only he can lead everyone to take revenge for all the grievances and hatred back then. No matter what, you have to protect him and help him return to the peak as soon as possible and regain the glory of the Kenshin." Chapter 1629. After instructing Francis, the burial of heaven went silent. Ji Tianxing knew that it had fallen into a deep slumber, so he put the burial of heaven away. Francis reluctantly watched the burial of heaven disappear, wanting to take a few more glances. However, he understood that Ji Tianxing was willing to show him the burial of heaven, which was already very rare. If he wanted to observe it for a while longer, he would be too tactless. After Ji Tianxing put away the burial of heaven, he calmly looked at Francis and asked, "Fourth Elder, do you have any other questions?" Francis hurriedly shook his head and said with an amiable expression, "Young Master Ji, there are no more questions. This old man's mission has been completed, so I can go back with a peace of mind. If I have offended you in any way, I hope that young Master Ji can forgive me." "You're too polite." Ji Tianxing slightly nodded and said politely. Francis looked at Ji Bai and said in a dignified tone, "Ji Bai, from now on, you will follow young Master Ji like a shadow. No matter what, even if you have to sacrifice your life, you must protect him." Ji Bai had personally witnessed the conversation between Francis and the burial of heaven, so he knew Ji Tianxing's identity and position. He did not hesitate to bow and accept the order, and said, "As you wish." Francis nodded in satisfaction and continued, "In addition, this old man came to Hui City this time. Great deity also sent Shohei with me. Ji Bai, you will protect young Master Ji in the open, and Shohei will protect him in the dark. The two of you must work together." Hearing the name Shohei, Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai were startled. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and thought to himself, "I didn't expect that other than Ji Bai, there would be someone called Shohei. I wonder if this Shohei is Ji Bai's brother or senior brother." Ji Bai's expression stiffened, and he frowned. However, he quickly returned to normal and expressionlessly nodded. "This disciple understands. Please be at ease, fourth elder." Francis slowly stood up, preparing to bid farewell to Ji Tianxing. At this time, Ji Tianxing suddenly thought of something and said to him, "Fourth elder, please wait for a moment. I have something to ask you." "Young Master Ji, please speak." Francis cupped his hands in greeting, showing that he was all ears. Ji Tianxing said with a dignified expression, "I wonder if fourth elder has heard of the demon race?" "Demon race?" Francis furrowed his brows, as a puzzled look appeared on his face. Ji Tianxing thought that he had never heard of it and was a little disappointed. He explained, "A few months ago, more than 10,000 miners and divine servants died in the glacial divine mine in the Arctic abyss. Those people were sucked dry of their blood, energy, and souls. They died in a miserable state, as if they were dried corpses that had been burned by fire. I went to investigate and killed 2 blood gods. In the end, I ran into a ghost child covered in ghost tattoos. Ghost child claimed to be one of the 36 demon monarchs and worked for the ancestral demon god. You should know that Kenshin was mortal enemies with the demon race when he was alive. I inherited Kenshin's will, and I am absolutely irreconcilable with the demon race. I swore to exterminate the demon race and kill the ancestral demon god." When he heard Ji Tianxing's words, Francis's eyes lit up, and he nodded repeatedly. "I understand now. Young Master Ji, the demon race that you speak of is actually called the ghost race. They have sinister and ugly appearances, and they possess many cruel, bloody, and evil secret techniques. They also use various evil altars to create world-destroying plagues and disasters. On Shenwu continent, all the martial artists hate and fear the ghost race. It is said that before the ancient era, the ghost race once wreaked havoc on Shenwu continent and killed countless people." Ji Tianxing immediately revealed a look of realization, and he nodded repeatedly. "No wonder I couldn't find any information about the demon race when I was flipping through the ancient books. I never thought that they would be called the ghost race on Shenwu continent. Although their name has changed, and their appearance are different from the demon races, they are still fundamentally the same." After he finished speaking, he looked expectantly at Francis and asked, "Fourth elder, how much do you know about the ghost race?" Francis frowned and replied with a grave expression, "I'm not very familiar with the ghost race, but I do know a lot of information. The ghost race is not tolerated by any of the other races, and they have lived in seclusion in Dark North Mountain for generations. It is an incomparably vast region that is about half the size of the Azure Dragon Empire. The environment in Dark North Mountain is harsh and incomparably dangerous. It is an infamous forbidden area on the continent, and ordinary people do not dare to approach it. It is said that the ghost race is divided into 36 powers in Dark North Mountain, and they have hundreds of millions of citizens. They also control many evil demons and giant beasts. The leaders of these 36 powers are known as the Demon Lords. Above the Demon Lords are 2 great demon saints, and they seem to be the strongest in Dark North Mountain." Ji Tianxing listened attentively, and his eyes flickered with a cold light. He roughly guessed that the ancestor fiend god was most likely hiding in Dark North Mountain. With the protection of hundreds of millions of demons, 36 demon lords, and 2 great demon saints, the ancestor fiend god would be able to sit back and relax, and quickly recover his strength. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing's heart felt like it was pierced by a thorn. At this time, Francis continued, 8,000 years ago, when the news of the ancestor's death spread, the ghost race was among the invaders of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains. One of my martial uncles was killed by a demon saint, and not even a complete corpse was left. I saw with my own eyes that my martial uncle's flesh and blood turned into a bloody mist, and was devoured by that demon saint. Speaking of the past, Francis's eyes surged with hatred, and his tone became low and cold. Ji Tianxing nodded, and consoled him with a heavy tone. "Fourth elder, don't worry, we will get our revenge sooner or later. One day I will purge Dark North Mountain, and kill hundreds of millions of demons." Francis nodded solemnly and said, "Young Master Ji, I believe in you, And I also look forward to that day. After that, the two of them chatted for a while. Francis stood up and cupped his hands towards Ji Tianxing and said, "Young Master Ji, your time is precious, so I won't delay you any longer. I will take my leave now and report back to the great immortal. Take care, I won't send you off." Ji Tianxing cupped his hands in return. Francis was very decisive, and he took out the black iron mask and put it on his face, and his figure flashed out of the study. The study quieted down, and only Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai remained. Ji Tianxing walked out of the door and said, "Ji Bai, we should also go back." Ji Bai silently nodded his head and followed behind him. After a quarter of an hour, the two of them left Hui City. Facing the yellow afternoon sun, the two of them flew across the sky and returned to God Bestowment Mountain. Ji Bai, as usual, remained calm and alert, vigilantly monitoring the surroundings. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was much more relaxed. While flying high in the sky, he was also silently thinking about the conversation between the burial of Heaven and Francis. Half an hour later, the two of them were flying over a vast primitive forest. Suddenly, from the two mountain peaks to the side, several dazzling lights lit up and rushed over as fast as lightning. Chapter 1630. When the 6 black-robed martial artists flew over from the two sides of the mountain, Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai immediately sensed that something was wrong. Although the two of them did not know the identity of the black-robed martial artists. But they could clearly feel that the black-robed martial artists were full of murderous intent, and they were coming menacingly. "Master, be careful." Ji Bai's expression suddenly became dignified, and the nerves in his body tensed up, as if he was facing a great enemy. A black light flashed in his palm, and the black treasured saber appeared. He held the treasured saber with both hands, and stared at the black-robed martial artists with a fierce gaze. His body crazily accumulated a vast amount of Fa. However, just as he was preparing to fight, Ji Tianxing's voice sounded in his mind. "Don't be impulsive, retreat first." As he spoke, Ji Tianxing pulled him and quickly retreated. In just a few breaths, the two of them retreated 100 miles away. At this time, the 6 black-robed martial artists spread out and launched a pincer attack from the left and right and rushed over aggressively. Ji Bai protected Ji Tianxing as they retreated and asked, "Master, why don't we take advantage of the fact that they haven't surrounded us and kill our way out?" Although the 6 black-robed martial artists were all Tribulation Realm experts. But their strength was between the 2nd and 4th level of the Tribulation Realm. If Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai attacked unexpectedly, it was very likely that they would tear open a gap and escape the encirclement before the other party could launch a siege. Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained with a dignified expression, "This group of black-robed martial artists is coming for me, and obviously it was premeditated. They must have set up an ambush in front. Even if we force our way out and break through the encirclement of the 6 black-robed martial artists, we will still fall into the other party's ambush." Hearing him say this, Ji Bai revealed a look of understanding. He turned his head to look at the sky behind him, and saw that over 100 miles away in the sky above the forest, there were indeed 4 black-robed martial artists. A total of 10 black-robed martial artists rushed over as fast as lightning and launched an encirclement. This scene had indeed verified Ji Tianxing's conjecture. Ji Bai revealed a look of admiration as he thought to himself, "Master is wise enough to see through the other party's plot in a flash." Luckily, Ji Tianxing retreated decisively and did not fall into the encirclement of the black-clothed martial artists. His flying speed was fast enough. Bringing Ji Bai with him, he retreated 200 miles away, pulling away from the 10 black-clothed martial artists. However, at this moment, an earth-shaking roar came from the forest in front of them. Roar! A deafening roar of a beast reverberated in the air above the forest and the mountains. Then, a dark red ferocious beast flew out of the forest and blocked their path. It was a monstrous giant ape that was over 300 meters tall and covered in red fur. It had 2 heads and 4 arms and a wide, bloody mouth. It even had a pair of wide wings, and its entire body was covered in scarlet flames, emitting an incomparably violent aura. Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai could clearly see that between the two heads of the giant ape, there was a middle-aged man wearing a red robe and a crystal skull mask. The giant ape roared like a large bell, opening its 3-meter-wide bloody mouth, revealing 2 rows of messy sharp fangs. Endless dark red flames spewed out from its big mouth, like a monstrous flood, pouring down from the sky. Suddenly, the sky was shrouded in flames, and half of the sky was illuminated in dark red like blood. Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai's faces changed, and their eyes flashed with anger. Damn it! There was actually an ambush here. There are ambushes in front, behind, left, and right. The other party is determined to win. As they spoke, the two of them used teleportation to escape to the left and right, and condensed a magic shield to protect themselves. Unfortunately, their speed was still too slow, and they were swept up by the dark red flames. Bang bang! Following 2 muffled booms, the two of them were sent flying thousands of feet away by the dark red flames. When the two of them got rid of the impact and stood steadily in the sky, the situation had changed. There was a 2-headed giant ape in front of them, and there were 10 black-clothed warriors chasing after them. Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai were surrounded, and they couldn't escape even if they had wings. Both sides stopped in the sky, and didn't make a move for the time being, facing each other with murderous intent. Ji Tianxing looked at the red-robed man on the 2-headed giant ape, and asked coldly, "Which force are you from?" Openly intercepting a god's disciple of Mount God, aren't you afraid of being punished by Mount God? The red-robed man looked down at Ji Tianxing, and under the crystal skull mask, only a pair of cold eyes could be seen. No matter who you are, today you will die without a doubt. If you know what's good for you, you should surrender. Otherwise, I don't mind turning you into ashes. The red-robed man's tone was cold and domineering, and it was full of unquestionable meaning. While he was speaking, Ji Bai held his treasured sword and silently guarded Ji Tianxing. Ji Bai looked at the red-robed man and the 10 black-clothed warriors fiercely, trying to determine the identity and origin of the other party through some clues. However, the black-clothed warriors and the red-robed man didn't have any identity symbols or badges on them. Ji Tianxing thought of something, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a mocking sneer. He said to the red-robed man, "Ever since I gave the divine sword to Emperor Chu Yun, the experts of the major empires no longer paid attention to me and were busy dealing with the Chu Yun Empire. Calculating the time, that idiot Emperor Chu Yun should have seen through the authenticity of the divine sword. If I'm not wrong, you are that idiot's lackeys, right?" The red-robed man's body suddenly trembled, and his eyes burst out with a fierce cold light, revealing an angry murderous intent. "Boy, you dare to insult the Holy Emperor, you deserve to die. Today, I will cut you into pieces and turn you into ashes. Kill him." Following the red-robed man's order, the 10 black-clothed warriors all waved their swords, and slashed out an earth-shattering saber light and sword light, besieging Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai. The 2-headed giant ape also roared furiously, waving its 4 thick and sturdy arms, and blasted out dozens of dark red flames, smashing towards Ji Tianxing. Suddenly, the sky within 100 miles was covered by the brilliance of spells, becoming dazzling and chaotic. The red-robed man's reaction made Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai certain that this group of people were assassins under Emperor Chu Yun. However, it was useless even if they knew the other party's identity. The most important thing now was to kill their way out of the encirclement, and then find a way to get rid of these assassins. Ji Bai rushed out with a cold face, waving his treasured sword without fear, and slashing out a sky full of saber light. Swish, swish, swish. The dazzling saber light crisscrossed the sky, forming a huge saber net, protecting him and Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing also took out the sword of burial of heaven, and used all of his strength, slashing out 1,000 long sword light, sweeping towards the black-clothed warriors. Chapter 1631. Boom boom boom. Deafening noises exploded one after another, fiercely reverberating in the sky. The sky full of saber light and sword shadows collided fiercely, collapsing one after another, turning into hundreds of millions of light fragments, sprinkling in the sky like raindrops. The violent and devastating shockwaves, like circles of colorful ripples, spread in all directions. Within 100 miles, it was turbid chaos. A large area of the primitive forest was destroyed into ruins by the shockwaves. A few thousand feet tall mountains were also shattered by the shockwaves, collapsing into a pile of gravel and yellow soil. The first round of confrontation between the two sides only lasted for 2 breaths before it ended. Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai were shaken to the point that their bodies trembled, their faces were pale, and the corners of their mouths overflowed with blood. 10 Tribulation Realm black-clothed martial artists, plus a 4th-layer Tribulation Realm 2-headed giant ape. The attack was fierce to the extreme. With their strength, it was impossible for them to resist head-on. Swish! Ji Bai endured his injuries and flew to Ji Tianxing's side as fast as the aurora. With an anxious expression he said, "Master, your subordinate will bring up the rear, you escape through the underground." Both of them were very clear that the so-called bringing up the rear was nothing more than sacrificing their own lives to delay a bit of time. Ji Tianxing raised his sleeve to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. With a cold expression, he shook his head and said in a low voice, "It's useless. The other party came prepared, we absolutely can't escape unscathed. The only thing we can do now is to fight to the end, perhaps only then will we have a chance of survival." Just as his voice fell, the 10 black-clothed martial artists launched another attack, pouncing over from all directions. All kinds of light blades, sword chi, raging flames, and rays of light shot out like a rain of arrows, covering dozens of miles of the sky. In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai were drowned in the sky full of attacks. The two of them were like a small boat in a stormy sea, about to capsize and be smashed into pieces by the huge waves. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing hurriedly took out the Kenshin battle robe, which turned into a pair of golden wings. Golden rock wings unite. Swish! The golden wings instantly closed, protecting him. Ji Bai also took out a silver metal ball and poured a majestic amount of magic power into it. Immediately, the metal ball turned into a dark silver armor that wrapped around his body. The lines of the armor were extremely sharp, and there was a pair of wide wings on its back, making it look quite majestic. This was a mid-grade tribulation-grade heavenly soul battlesuit, a very exquisite magic treasure. When the 4th elder came to Hui City this time, he gave this armor to Ji Bai to help him better protect Ji Tianxing. In the next moment, an earth-shattering spell attack fiercely bombarded Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai. Bang 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 bang. A series of muffled explosions resounded through the sky. The saber light, the sword light, and the spell light all exploded, turning into a colorful torrent that spread in all directions. A moment later, the 5-colored torrent dissipated, and the sky regained its clarity. However, the sky was empty. Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai were nowhere to be seen. The 10 black-clothed martial artists all held swords and sabers, their eyes sharp as they searched around. The red-robed man stood on the shoulder of the 2-headed giant ape, watching the battle in the sky without making a move. He stared coldly at the ruins and ordered in a cold tone, "They are in the ruins, capture them for me." The 10 black-clothed martial artists received the order and immediately landed on the ruins and drilled into the ground. They soon found Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai buried in the ruins, lying motionless on the ground, as if they had fainted. 4 black-clothed martial artists went to capture them, while the other 6 remained vigilant. Seeing that the 4 black-clothed martial artists came to Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai's side, they were about to cast a spell to capture them. Suddenly, the unconscious Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai's body lit up with a bright light, bursting out with a violent aura that could destroy the heavens and the earth. Heaven-cleaving sword. A dark golden sword light that was 100 feet long, wrapped in purple lightning, struck the 2 black-clothed martial artists. The distance between the two sides was too close, and the speed of the sword light was as fast as lightning, making the 2 black-clothed martial artists unable to dodge. Following 2 muffled ping-ping sounds, the 2 black-clothed martial artists were sent flying on the spot. A large amount of blood splashed out from their bodies. In the midst of the blood, there was a broken arm and a broken leg. Ji Tianxing pretended to be unconscious. and at the crucial moment, he burst out with all his strength and launched a surprise attack, seriously injuring the two black-clothed martial artists in one fell swoop. On the other side, Ji Bai also brandished his saber, using the Thunder Wild Saber, and in an instant, slashed 18 times. The fate of the two black-clothed martial artists was even more miserable. Their bodies were cut into pieces by the 18 lightning-like saber lights, turning into a pile of minced meat and blood rain. After all, his strength was comparable to the black-clothed martial artists, and the power of his saber technique was more powerful. The sudden change caused the black-clothed martial artists' eyes to change, and they immediately brandished their sabers and swords to surround and attack. The red-robed man in the sky also had a burst of cold light in his eyes, and killing intent burst out from his body. Despicable little bastard, sinister and despicable. He gritted his teeth and cursed, and hurriedly ordered the black-clothed martial artists, "Don't let your guard down, no matter what, take down Ji Tianxing." Those black-clothed martial artists, previously, thought that this mission was very simple. With their Tribulation Realm powerhouses, assassinating an Essence Soul Realm martial artist was as easy as flipping their hands. But now, they had seen Ji Tianxing's methods, and no longer dared to be careless, and launched a fierce attack with all their strength. Both sides fought fiercely in the sky again. The two black-clothed martial artists, whose bodies were destroyed, were only left with their Essence Souls, and quickly escaped. The other two black-clothed martial artists, who were missing an arm and a leg, endured their injuries, and attacked Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai without caring about their own safety. Ding ding ding! Peng 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 peng! Both sides used their unique skills, and fiercely clashed in the sky, causing a series of explosions. 5 colored streams of light covered the sky, enveloping a radius of 100 miles. Everyone's figures constantly flickered, appearing and disappearing in the sky. In the beginning, Ji Bai protected Ji Tianxing with all his strength, helping him block countless attacks. After fighting for a while, Ji Bai began to be injured, and his injuries continued to worsen, and he was beaten to the point of retreating. He could not even protect himself, but he still risked his life to protect Ji Tianxing. After a short 100 breaths of time, he was covered in blood, and his black robe was full of cracks and wounds. The black-clothed martial artists knew that he was the most difficult to deal with, and as long as they dealt with him, killing Ji Tianxing would be as easy as flipping their hands. Therefore, 5 black-clothed martial artists joined forces to besiege Ji Bai, forcing him to constantly retreat, farther and farther away from Ji Tianxing. The other 3 black-clothed martial artists surrounded Ji Tianxing and continued to besiege him. Ji Tianxing's situation also became precarious, and he could lose his life at any time. After exchanging hundreds of blows, his hair was disheveled, his white robe was stained with blood, and his body was covered in wounds. Fortunately, Kenshin's battle robe protected him and helped him block several fatal attacks. Chapter 1632. Ji Tianxing was at the 7th level of the primordial spirit realm and had mastered many powerful techniques. He was not afraid of any genius or expert below the tribulation passing realm. He could defeat them all. However, the 3 black-clothed cultivators attacking him were all 3rd and 4th level tribulation passing realm martial monarchs. Their strength was much higher than his. They could completely crush him. There was a gap of a whole realm between them. There was no way he could escape, let alone turn the tables. If he had not cultivated the galaxy body tempering art and had a strong physical body, he would have been killed several times over. At this moment he yearned for powerful strength. If he could break through to the tribulation passing realm, even if he was only at the 1st level, he would not be in such a sorry state. This battle was undoubtedly the most dangerous battle he had had in recent years. His chest, back, shoulders, and legs were covered with wounds so deep that his bones could be seen. Warm blood gushed out from the wounds, drenching his white robe and making him look particularly ferocious. His long hair was also messily draped over his shoulders, stained with blood. Piercing pain came from all over his body, tormenting his nerves. With his strong willpower, he stubbornly held on and clenched his teeth. He would not give up until the last moment. Boom! With a muffled explosion, a fist as large as a mountain hit him. He spat out a mouthful of blood and was sent flying, crashing into the ruins 10 miles away. Another black-clothed cultivator rushed over, holding a long saber with both hands. He slashed out a 100-meter-long saber light. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing could not dodge. He could only wave the burial of heaven to block the attack. Questioning heaven with horizontal sword. Boom! The saber light that could split heaven and earth shattered the 100-meter-long sword light and hit him. With a muffled sound, he fell from the sky and smashed into the ruins. A deep pit was formed in the ground, and dust flew everywhere. He was buried in the soil, and a heart-wrenching pain came from his body. It was as if all the bones in his body were shattered. 30 miles away, Ji Bai was surrounded by 5 black-clothed cultivators. His body was covered in blood and he was in an extremely sorry state. He was beaten back again and again, almost unable to fight back. By chance, he caught a glimpse of Ji Tianxing in the distance. Seeing that Ji Tianxing's injuries were severe and that he was about to die under the black-clothed martial artist's sword, he was so angry that his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, turning blood red. No! He let out an earth-shattering roar, and his entire body ignited with dark red blood flames. His body suddenly expanded. In the blink of an eye, he turned into a 30-meter-tall giant surrounded by lightning. His body was grayish-brown, as if it was formed from rocks, and his 4 limbs were shockingly thick. He held 2 purple lightning chains in his hands and ruthlessly whipped away the surrounding black-clothed martial artists. Then he recklessly rushed towards Ji Tianxing. Several black-clothed martial artists were overwhelmed with shock and tried to intercept him. However, no one was able to resist Ji Bai directly. Without exception, all of them were sent flying by the lightning chains. In the sky not far away, the red-robed man stood on the shoulder of the 2-headed giant ape, witnessing this scene with his own eyes. Seeing that Ji Bai suddenly turned into a stone giant and was able to control lightning, his eyes flashed, revealing a deep shock. This is bloodline awakening? I didn't think that this seemingly ordinary young man would actually have a different bloodline. The shock in the red-robed man's eyes quickly disappeared, and he coldly ordered, "Entangle him." Once he ignites his bloodline, killing him will be as easy as flipping a hand. The 5 black-clothed martial artists received the order and immediately joined forces to form a battle formation, displaying an exquisite joint attack technique. They did not fight Ji Bai head-on, but only tried to intercept him so that he could not break through the obstacles and rescue Ji Tianxing. Ji Bai's entire body went berserk, roaring like a desolate beast, rampaging, wantonly releasing lightning that filled the sky. However, his attacks were all neutralized by the black-clothed martial artists, and he was unable to break out of the encirclement. Ji Tianxing was lying in a deep pit covered in blood, struggling with difficulty, trying to fly into the sky. At this moment, 3 black-clothed martial artists descended from the sky, waving their swords and sabers. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The overwhelming saber light and sword shadows emitted an incomparably violent power, suppressing Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was suppressed to the point that his face was deathly pale, and his body seemed to be frozen, unable to move. Seeing that he was about to be chopped to death by the saber light and sword shadows. At the moment of life and death, he raised his head to look at the 3 black-clothed martial artists. His gaze was firm and unyielding, and he coldly shouted, "Burial of heaven, lend me a hand." Finished speaking, he waved his hand and threw out the Burial of Heaven sword. The Burial of Heaven sword immediately expanded, becoming a 1,000 feet tall giant sword. At the same time, a 1,000 feet tall golden sword appeared above Ji Tianxing's head. It was his primordial spirit. His entire body turned into a dazzling golden light, fusing with the primordial spirit golden sword. Then, the Burial of Heaven sword also fused with the primordial spirit golden sword, causing the golden sword's power to increase by 2 times. Azure Dragon's Sacred Sword. From the 1,000 feet tall golden sword came a roar that reverberated through the universe. In the next instant, The golden sword bloomed with dazzling golden flames, erupting with a destructive power that ruthlessly pierced toward the black-clothed martial artists in the sky. The dazzling golden flames condensed into the image of a divine dragon, enveloping the primordial spirit golden sword. This sword was filled with an indomitable aura. Like a sleeping dragon rising to the heavens, it seemed to pierce through the firmament, and nothing could stop it. Boom! Crack! Amidst a deafening explosion, the giant sword shattered the saber light and sword shadows that filled the sky, and ruthlessly pierced another black-clothed martial artist. In that instant, the black-clothed martial artist's body seemed exceptionally small in front of the 1,000-feet-long golden sword, like an ant. After being pierced by the azure dragon's sacred sword, his body actually shattered like a porcelain vase, disintegrating into fragments that filled the sky. Blood and pieces of flesh were instantly incinerated by the golden flames, turning into ashes. Only the black-clothed martial artist's primordial spirit luckily escaped the calamity, dodging the azure dragon's sacred sword's attack. Swoosh! The azure dragon's sacred sword flew tens of thousands of feet high in the sky, gradually exhausted, and stopped. Then, the burial of heaven sword split up and rapidly returned to its original form. The primordial spirit golden sword and Ji Tianxing also separated and returned to their original state. Ji Tianxing was covered in blood, standing high in the sky with disheveled hair, holding the burial of heaven sword in his hand. The primordial spirit golden sword dimmed and retracted back into his body. Just now, he had barely used the azure dragon's sacred sword. Using this sword technique at the critical moment of life and death had nearly exhausted all his magic power. The secret technique of the azure dragon's sacred sword, coupled with the amplification of the primordial spirit golden sword and the burial of heaven sword, caused the might of this sword to be unprecedented. This was the strongest sword technique he could use at the moment. Fortunately, the effect of this sword was remarkable. It destroyed the physical body of a black-clothed martial artist, causing him to flee the battlefield in a sorry state. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing could not use it a second time. The other two black-clothed martial artists were stunned for a moment before they chased after him even more ferociously. Chapter 1633. Ji Tianxing's magic power was almost depleted and he could not hold on for long. The two black-clothed martial artists could easily finish him off. Moreover, the red-robed man and the two-headed giant ape were eyeing him from not far away. Ji Tianxing knew that the red-robed man was the leader of this group of assassins and his strength was unfathomable. Even if he could create a miracle and kill the two black-clothed martial artists, he would still be killed by the red-robed man in the end. No matter how he looked at it, his ending was a dead end. Even so, he would not sit still and wait for death. Seeing the two black-clothed martial artists rushing over, he quickly took out a talisman from his interspatial ring. Creating something out of nothing, heaven and earth will help me, 5 elements true spirits. Ji Tianxing muttered as he formed a spell with both hands and shot out a few streaks of dazzling light into the talisman. Swoosh! The dark golden talisman ignited with flames and turned into a ray of sacred golden light that entered his body. Suddenly, his body expanded violently and quickly turned into a 30-meter-tall giant. His entire body was shining with dazzling golden light. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth within a 10,000-mile radius also surged crazily and turned into a spiritual energy tide that entered his body. His strength skyrocketed rapidly and his aura became powerful and domineering. His eyes were shining brightly. This talisman was a treasure from the universal treasure box. It was the Myriad Transformations spiritual continuation talisman that Hong Chengtian had personally refined. Its effect was very mysterious. It could stimulate a martial artist's potential and increase his magic power to the limit for 15 minutes. Just a moment ago, Ji Tianxing's magic power was empty and his spirit was dispirited. Now, he was full of energy and murderous intent. When the two black-clothed martial artists rushed over, he did not hesitate to wave the burial of heaven sword and slashed out 7 streaks of dazzling sword light. 7 stars sword. 7 streaks of sword light that were hundreds of meters long collided with the attacks of the black-clothed martial artists, and a series of loud noises exploded. The sword light shattered, and the violent impact hit Ji Tianxing again and sent him flying. He fell into the boundless sea of clouds and flew backward for over 10 miles before he finally stopped. Cough, cough. The injuries to his internal organs were even more severe. His back was hunched, and his face was pale as he coughed up blood. The 2 black-clothed martial artists did not give up. They rushed over at the speed of light and once again brandished their swords. Swish! Swish! More than 30 sharp sword lights came from all directions, cutting off all of Ji Tianxing's escape routes. Ji Tianxing could only close his wings to protect himself. Bang, 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 bang. More than 30 rays of sword light slashed the golden wings one after another, resulting in a deafening explosion. Ji Tianxing was sent flying again. He fell straight down from the sky and crashed into a 3,000-meter-tall mountain with a loud bang. Half of the mountain was smashed, sending dust and gravel into the air. The power of the golden wings was finally exhausted. They became dim and retracted back into Ji Tianxing's body. Without the protection of the Kenshin battle robe, Ji Tianxing's situation became even more precarious. However, the 2 black-clothed cultivators were even more ferocious. They gave chase with surging killing chi. Swish! 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 Both of them brandished their swords and slashed out more than 40 sword lights, enveloping Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had just climbed out of the ruins when he was enveloped by the sword lights. At this moment, he no longer had any trump cards that could resist the sword lights. He was about to be hit by the sword lights. Even if he did not die, his body would be destroyed. At this critical moment, an icy blue dazzling light suddenly lit up in the ruins beside him. Swish! The icy blue dazzling light rushed into the sky and bloomed above Ji Tianxing's head. It formed a light shield with a radius of 10,000 zhang, like an icy blue umbrella. Bang, bang, bang. More than 40 sword lights slashed the icy blue light shield, producing a deafening sound. The icy blue light shield shook violently, but it did not shatter. The sword light that filled the sky collapsed and shattered, turning into fragments that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, bursting out in all directions. Ji Tianxing was surprised and subconsciously turned his head to look at the ruins beside him. He saw a young woman in a white Taoist robe with 2 ponytails standing on top of the ruins like a lofty mountain. Although she was tall and thin, her face was a little thin, but her whole body exuded a mysterious and powerful cold aura. Her left hand formed a seal, manipulating the icy blue light shield in the sky, splitting it into thousands of icy blue sword lights, piercing towards the 2 black-clothed cultivators. In her right hand, she was holding a crystal-clear icy blue sword, exuding a bone-chilling cold. This was a woman in her early 20s. She was tall and thin, with a slightly ordinary appearance. People would not pay attention to her at first glance. However, her eyes were extremely large, far beyond ordinary people. Her pupils were also icy blue, making her look particularly mysterious. When Ji Tianxing looked at her, her eyes were focused on the sky, expressionless as she chased after the black-clothed cultivators. She did not look back, and said to Ji Tianxing through telepathy, "Master, please leave this place quickly. Leave this place to me and Ji Bai." Her voice was crisp and clean, containing a decisive and capable temperament. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and guessed her identity. A disciple of the Pillar of Heaven's Mountain? Are you the Shohei that the 4th elder mentioned? Shohei is actually a woman. Previously in Hui City, the 4th elder had mentioned that Shohei had also come. At that time, Ji Tianxing was still wondering if Shohei was Ji Bai's brother or senior brother. But he never thought that Shohei was actually a young woman. This name and the white-clothed woman in front of him didn't match at all, right? However, these thoughts flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He made a prompt decision and said, "I won't leave you guys behind. Let's advance and retreat together." As he spoke, he also rushed into the sky and charged towards the 2 black-clothed cultivators. The 2 black-clothed cultivators were stabbed by thousands of icy blue sword lights until they were dripping with blood, their bodies riddled with wounds. At this moment, Shohei was still casting spells. She controlled thousands of icy blue light blades to form an icy blue hurricane that strangled the two black-clothed cultivators. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to charge over. He opened the third eye on his forehead and released endless lightning. Boom! The destructive purple divine lightning condensed into a pillar of lightning and fiercely struck a black-clothed cultivator. The black-clothed cultivator was already heavily injured, and after being struck by the divine lightning pillar, his body collapsed on the spot, turning into countless pieces of pitch-black charcoal. With his body destroyed, his primordial spirit flew out. However, he didn't dare to stay in the sky and fled in panic. Seeing this scene, Shohei turned her head and glanced at Ji Tianxing. A look of surprise flashed across her eyes. She had never thought that Ji Tianxing, who was only at the primordial soul realm, could control the power of divine lightning. No wonder Ji Bai is dead set on master and is extremely loyal. This thought flashed through her mind as she continued to control thousands of icy blue light blades to kill the other black-clothed cultivator. The black-clothed cultivator fell into the icy blue hurricane and didn't last long before his body was minced into pieces. Even his primordial spirit was injured by Shohei and fled miserably. Ji Tianxing's crisis was temporarily resolved. Chapter 1634. Swoosh! Shohei waved his hand and retracted the thousands of ice blue light blades in the sky. The light blades that filled the sky gathered in her hand and condensed into a palm-sized sword sheath. The sword sheath was ice blue in color. It was more than 3 feet long and more than a palm wide. The shape was very simple and elegant. The surface was engraved with mysterious patterns and words, and the edges were inlaid with dark golden jade. Clang! Shohei held the ice blue sword and inserted it back into the sword sheath, emitting a crisp sound. Ji Tianxing stared at the sword sheath and sized it up a few times before he saw through it. The sword sheath was too wide, enough to place 2 swords side by side. Shohei carried the sword sheath on his back as if he was carrying an exquisite stool. However, this was not an ordinary sword sheath. It was also a mysterious magic treasure. The sword sheath could split into tens of thousands of light blades and form a powerful sword formation. Shohei's personality was cold and he did not say much. His figure flashed and rushed into the distance to rescue Ji Bai. Ji Tianxing hurriedly followed and took out 2 pills to take the opportunity to suppress his injuries. In the sky 50 miles away, Ji Bai was fighting with 5 black-clothed martial artists. His bloodline awakening had already ended. He had returned to his original appearance from the rock giant who controlled lightning. His black robe was tattered, his entire body was dripping with blood, and his hair was messy. His aura was very chaotic and his mana was very empty. He was already at the end of his rope and could faint at any time. The 5 black-clothed martial artists only suffered minor injuries. Their bodies were charred black by the lightning and they looked somewhat miserable. However, the 5 of them worked together to form a battle formation and firmly trap Ji Bai. Ji Bai desperately rushed left and right, but he was still unable to break through the encirclement. Shohei and Ji Tianxing flew across the sky at lightning speed and quickly approached Ji Bai. However, the 2 of them had only flown 30 miles when they were stopped by the 2-headed giant ape. Roar! The 2-headed giant ape roared and waved its 4 arms with a murderous aura. It opened its bloody mouth and released a raging fire that covered the sky and earth. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, a radius of 50 miles turned into a world of flames. Ji Tianxing and Shohei were both engulfed by the monstrous flames. They tried their best to circulate their energy to resist the burning of the flames. Shohei decisively pulled out his sword and controlled the sword case with his left hand. It condensed into a huge ice blue umbrella to block the flames that filled the sky. She waved the ice blue sword in her right hand and slashed out dozens of sharp sword lights toward the 2-headed giant ape. Peng ping peng. The 2-headed gigantic ape was enveloped by the sword light, and it immediately let out a series of blood-curdling screams. Blood splattered all over the sky. The flames that blotted out the sky were quickly dispersed by Shohei. However, the red-robed man standing on the shoulders of the two-headed giant ape had long been staring at Ji Tianxing. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he raised his hand and blasted out a dark golden fist aura towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing was caught off guard. He was hit by the dark golden fist light and was sent flying backward. There was a crater in his chest, and several of his bones were broken. Blood kept flowing out of his wounds. After suffering such a heavy injury, his strength weakened and his face was as white as a sheet of paper. The power of the myriad transformations continuation talisman also began to weaken. It wouldn't be long before it lost its effect. Ji Tianxing knew that he didn't have much time left. If he couldn't get out of this predicament before the effects of the talisman disappeared, he would most likely die here. At this time, Shohei waved his ice-blue sword with all his might and crazily attacked the two-headed giant ape and the red-robed man. The giant ape and the red-robed man were pinned down and had no time to care about Ji Tianxing. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing flew into the sky without hesitation and rushed towards Ji Bai. Shohei could only temporarily restrain the giant ape and the red-robed man. It was useless for him to help Shohei. It was impossible for him to defeat the other party. Rather than that, he might as well help Ji Bai out. Perhaps it would have a miraculous effect. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing endured his injuries and flew across the sky with the divine concealment step, arriving behind a black-clothed warrior. 5 black-clothed warriors formed a battle formation and attacked Ji Bai one after another. Ji Bai was beaten back and his injuries became more and more serious. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing's eyes flashed with a biting cold killing intent, and he brazenly used his ultimate skill. Heaven-splitting sword. He erupted with all his mana, holding the burial of heaven sword with both hands, he slashed at the black-clothed warrior with all his might. This sword strike converged the strength, essence, energy, and spirit of his entire lifetime. Moreover, it contained an all-conquering and violent will to destroy everything. That was the legendary sword intent. In the past, the burial of heaven had reminded Ji Tianxing that if he wanted to become a true sword expert, he had to fuse his will with his sword arts and produce his own sword intent. At this moment, Ji Tianxing was in a desperate situation. He was filled with grief and anger, and his killing intent soared to the sky. He had finally comprehended sword intent. Bang! The 300-meter-long dark golden sword, carrying purple divine lightning, fiercely slashed at the black-clothed warrior, exploding with an earth-shattering sound. The black-clothed warrior was caught off guard and was instantly drowned by the golden sword light. His body of flesh and blood was actually split in half by the sword, and then killed by the divine lightning, turning into pitch-black charcoal. The blood that splattered all over the sky was also dispersed by the divine lightning Zidian. A blazing white primordial spirit flew out from the golden sword light and fled into the distance in panic. The black-clothed warriors' joint attack formation was thus broken by Ji Tianxing. The remaining 4 black-clothed warriors were obviously shocked, and they looked at Ji Tianxing with vigilance. There were even 2 black-clothed warriors who were close to him, waving their swords and sabers to kill him. Ji Tianxing's attack succeeded, and he quickly retreated, using the divine concealment step, hiding in the sky. The 4 black-clothed warriors couldn't find him for a while, so they could only continue to besiege Ji Bai. However, they were even more vigilant and alert. As they besieged Ji Bai, they monitored the surrounding movements. Ji Tianxing wanted to use the same trick again, but it was almost impossible. Therefore, he patiently hid in the dark, looking for an opportunity to attack. After the 4 black-clothed warriors and Ji Bai fought for more than 30 moves, Ji Bai's injuries became more and more serious, and his body was also on the verge of collapse. Finally, Ji Tianxing seized the opportunity and decisively used his trump card. God-slaying spear. He raised his left arm, and an endless golden divine flame gushed out from his palm, condensing into a 3-meter-long golden divine spear, and fiercely pierced towards a black-clothed warrior. That black-clothed warrior and his companion were sprinting side by side, waving their swords at Ji Bai with all their might. This was the best opportunity that Ji Tianxing patiently waited for. The indestructible god-slaying spear instantly pierced through the first black-clothed warrior's magic power shield and leather armor. Immediately after, the second black-clothed warrior was also not spared, and was pierced through by the god-slaying spear. Bang! In the deafening loud noise, the god-slaying spear exploded. The earth-shattering golden divine flame rose up like a mushroom cloud. The two black-clothed warriors were destroyed by the god-slaying spear, and turned into pieces of flesh, scattering in the sky. Their primordial spirits were also heavily injured, and they flew into the sky in a daze, fleeing into the distance. Chapter 1635. Ji Bai's crisis was resolved. The remaining two black-clothed martial artists were unable to trap him at all. Of course, Ji Bai was also an arrow at the end of its flight. His fighting strength had sharply decreased, so it was impossible for him to kill the two black-clothed martial artists. As for Ji Tianxing, his Fa Li was already exhausted and he had used up all his trump cards. His body was rapidly shrinking and gradually returning to its original state. This was the effect of the 10,000 transformations continuation talisman was weakening and was about to lose its effect. Ji Bai, if you don't leave now, when will you? Ji Tianxing shouted as he waved the burial of heaven sword and slashed out a few sword lights, blocking the two black-clothed martial artists. Ji Bai took the opportunity to escape and followed him into the sky, escaping in the direction of Sealed God Mountain. Of course, while escaping, Ji Bai did not forget to use his divine sense to shout to Shohei, "Junior sister, don't fight, find a chance to escape." Shohei was fighting with the two-headed giant ape and the red-robed man, trying her best to resist the attacks of the giant ape and the red-robed man. Her strength was comparable to the giant ape, slightly weaker than the red-robed man, so it was particularly strenuous for her to fight. Most of the time, she was passively defending and resisting. She was beaten to the point of retreating and had no chance to fight back. Her situation was very dangerous, and her body was covered in dark red blood with many injuries. Seeing Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai successfully escape, her eyes flashed with a touch of relief, and she replied with a sound transmission, "Ji Bai, take master and retreat first, I will cover the rear." Ji Bai did not object and quickly followed Ji Tianxing. Now that he and Ji Tianxing were arrows at the end of their flight and had lost their fighting strength, Shohei could cover the rear. When the red-robed man saw that Ji Tianxing had escaped, he immediately flew into a rage, killing intent surging in his eyes. "Damn little bastard, don't even think about escaping from me," the red-robed man shouted with a murderous aura. He rode the two-headed giant ape and chased after Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai. Roar! The two-headed giant ape also let out a furious roar, desperately flapping its flame wings, turning into a dark red stream of light, cutting through the sky. "Damn it! We can't let him catch up to master." Shohei's expression changed, and he chased after him like a shadow. She controlled the sword case with her left hand and turned it into a sky full of sword lights to attack the two-headed giant ape. Her right hand waved the sword and attacked the red-robed man with all her might. In order to delay the two-headed giant ape and the red-robed man, she did not hesitate to consume a large amount of her magic power and used a powerful ultimate move. This move was indeed effective. The two-headed giant ape's speed was greatly reduced, and it was getting further and further away from Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing endured his injuries and summoned his Yuan Shen golden sword. He flew across the sky with the speed of light. In a short span of 100 breaths of time, he had brought Ji Bai and fled a few hundred miles away, escaping the pursuit of the two-headed giant ape. His strength was completely exhausted, his consciousness blurred, and he almost fainted. Thus, he withdrew the golden primordial spirit sword and summoned the black dragon from the sword world. Roar! The black dragon let out a resounding dragon roar and carried Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai back to Bestowment God Mountain at its fastest speed. On the other side, Shohei had been entangled with the two-headed giant ape and the red-robed man. Seeing Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai escape far away and their figures disappear at the end of the horizon, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She no longer continued to fight. After two feints, She turned around and fled without hesitation. She turned into a blazing white light blade and flew across the sky as fast as lightning. Soon she pulled away. The two-headed giant ape and the red-robed man chased after her with all their might. In the sky further away, two black-clothed martial artists also chased after the red-robed man. Unknowingly, an hour had passed. The black dragon carried Ji Tianxing and Ji Bai and finally flew back to the foot of Bestowment God Mountain. In the sky 100 miles behind them, Shohei also turned into a white light and rushed over as fast as lightning. In the sea of clouds further away, the two-headed giant ape carried the red-robed man and chased after them with murderous intent. However, 100 miles away from Bestowment God Mountain, the two-headed giant ape stopped and stood on top of a mountain peak. The red-robed man stood on the shoulder of the giant ape and looked up at the sacred Bestowment God Mountain. His eyes flashed with a cold light, revealing a strong sense of unwillingness. Damn it! In the end, I still let that little bastard escape. Although he had a mission, if he did not kill or capture Ji Tianxing, he would be severely punished by the great emperor of the Chuyan Empire. However, he knew very well that Ji Tianxing had already escaped back to Bestowment God Mountain and he had no chance. If he rashly broke into Bestowment God Mountain, he would definitely alarm the Golden Armored Guard. At that time, he would definitely die miserably. No matter how unwilling and angry he was in his heart, he could only give up the chase. Ji Tianxing, the next time you meet me, you won't be so lucky. I will definitely tear you into pieces, definitely. The red-robed man cursed with resentment and rode the two-headed giant ape. He turned around and drilled into the sea of clouds, quickly disappearing into the distance. The black dragon stopped in midair, hiding in the vast white sea of clouds. Ji Tianxing was sitting on its back. His body was covered in blood, his aura was weak, and he was meditating. Ji Bai was lying on the dragon's back, his body covered in blood. His eyes were closed and he had fallen into a coma. Swoosh! A blazing white brilliance flew over and landed on the black dragon's back. The brilliance faded away, revealing a tall figure in a white dress. It was Shohei. She glanced at the black dragon, and a strong sense of surprise flashed in her eyes. She almost couldn't help but scream. Of course, she recognized that this was a sacred black dragon, the legendary divine dragon. Before this, she had only seen the legends of the divine dragon in history books and biographies, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. If she saw the divine dragon with her own eyes on another occasion, she would definitely be shocked and exclaim in surprise. But not now. She quickly walked to Ji Tianxing's side and released her divine sense to check on Ji Tianxing's injuries. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was riddled with injuries, but they were all physical injuries and his primordial spirit was not seriously injured, she was finally relieved. She waved her palm and sent out a wisp of greenwood light into Ji Tianxing's body to help Ji Tianxing heal his injuries. Ji Tianxing opened his eyes and shook his head at her. Shohei, don't worry about my injuries. Let's take a look at Ji Bai's situation first. Shohei nodded and quickly retracted her palm. She turned around and looked at the unconscious Ji Bai. She used her divine sense to check on Ji Bai's injuries. After checking the situation, she immediately frowned and her expression became serious. Ji Tianxing saw that her expression was strange and asked with concern, "How are Ji Bai's injuries?" Shohei said in a low voice, "Master, Ji Bai's injuries are too serious and he has already fainted. He was already riddled with injuries, and the injuries to his body and primordial spirit were extremely serious. At the critical moment, he used his trump card, the lightning god's treasure body, completely overdrawing his strength and primordial spirit. However, Master doesn't have to worry too much. Ji Bai's life is not in danger. I have pills and treasures specially made for him to heal his injuries. He only needs to recuperate for a month and he will be able to recover." After hearing Shohei's words, Ji Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief and nodded slightly. "Since that's the case, you and Ji Bai will stay near the Investiture God Mountain. You should treat his injuries as soon as possible." Chapter 1636. Shohei brought the unconscious Ji Bai to the foot of Mount God Bestowment to treat his injuries. Ji Tianxing returned to the east courtyard of Heaven's Saint Palace and entered a secret room to treat his injuries. The secret room was filled with spiritual energy and many elixirs were stored. Moreover, the flow of time was 5 times faster than the outside world. Ji Tianxing recuperated in the secret room for half a month. The injuries of his physical body and primordial spirit were quickly healed. His strength had also returned to its peak state. At this time, only 3 days had passed in the outside world. On the morning of the 4th day, he ended his seclusion and walked out of the secret room. The guard guarding outside the secret room hurriedly came forward and respectfully handed over a letter. "Young Master Ji, a guard captain sent this letter yesterday afternoon. He said that he wanted to hand it over to you." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and reached out to take the envelope, sizing it up. He saw that the letter was empty. There was no signature or signature. Ji Tianxing waved his hand to dismiss the guard. He opened the letter and took it out. The light purple letter paper emitted a fresh smell of sandalwood. The edges of the letter were covered with light silver patterns. A line of delicate and cute words was displayed on the letter paper. "Tianxing, long time no see. Please come to the north courtyard for a chat." There was only this line of words on the entire letter paper. Ji Tianxing frowned and a trace of doubt flashed across his eyes. Looking at this handwriting, it should be written by a woman. But who would call me that? North Courtyard? Which palace's North Courtyard is it? Could it be the Heaven Saint Palace? In his impression, there were many palaces at the peak of Mount God Bestowment. However, the Heaven Saint Palace was the largest. It was divided into 4 courtyards, east, west, south, and north. Ordinary God's disciples and God's envoys could not enter the Heaven Saint Palace. Only the sons of God, and goddesses were qualified to live there. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing's mind flashed and he immediately thought of a person. Jiu. That's right, every time she comes to the peak of Mount God Bestowment, she stays in the north courtyard. Moreover, when she left, she said that she would come back for the God-disciple assessment. Ji Tianxing put away the letter and walked out of the east courtyard, heading for the north courtyard. Half an hour later, he arrived at the gate of the northern courtyard. The 4 golden armored guards guarding the 2 sides of the gate bowed respectfully when they saw him. "Greetings, young Master Ji." "Greetings, young Master Ji. His young highness has been waiting for a long time." One of the golden armored guards had clearly been instructed by Jiu to lead the way for Ji Tianxing. Under the guidance of the guard, Ji Tianxing passed through the courtyard and a garden before entering the main hall of the northern courtyard. The spacious and bright main hall was the meeting hall of the northern courtyard. Next to it were the reception room and study room. Ji Tianxing sat in the main hall and waited while the golden armored guard went to report the news. Not long after, the sound of footsteps came from the door. A man and a woman walked into the hall. Ji Tianxing quickly turned his head and looked at the entrance of the main hall. He saw who it was. The first person to enter the main hall was a little girl who was 1 meter tall and looked like she was carved out of jade. She was extremely cute and nimble. She was wearing a small red dress and had a pair of clear and flawless eyes. Her entire body was exuding an incomparably noble aura. Without a doubt, she was the little princess, Jiu. The person following behind Jiu was a tall and handsome young man. The young man wore a long golden robe with a golden dragon embroidered on his chest and sleeves. He also wore a luxurious golden crown on his head. He had long golden hair and a fair and handsome face. His blue eyes had a pair of golden pupils. This was a handsome and valiant noble young man. His every move showed that he was cultured and had a noble aura. Jiu had just entered the main hall. When she saw Ji Tianxing, a bright smile bloomed on her face and she waved happily to greet him. "Tianxing, long time no see. Your name seems to have spread far and wide." As she spoke, Jiu blinked her big eyes and revealed a playful smile. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded to greet her. He said, "Princess Jiu, how have you been? You said that you would come back before the God-disciple assessment. I didn't expect that as a holy lady, you would go back on your words." Jiu stood in front of him and smiled awkwardly. She explained, I was delayed by something important. That's why I came back late. However, even if I came back late by more than a month, it wouldn't affect you. You still became the #1 God disciple. The two of them were like old friends who hadn't seen each other for many years. They chatted naturally and even joked with each other. The young man in the golden robe stood quietly behind Jiujio and looked at Ji Tianxing calmly. He didn't say anything. After Ji Tianxing and Jiujio exchanged greetings, he nodded to Ji Tianxing and said with a smile, "Ji Tianxing, I've heard about you from Jiujio. It's really better to meet you in person than to hear about you." Ji Tianxing looked at the young man in the golden robe and asked Jiujio, "Princess Jiujio, this is?" Jiujio quickly pulled the young man's sleeve and introduced him with a smile. "I was so focused on chatting with Tianxing that I almost forgot to introduce him to you. Tianxing, this is my 7th brother. He's one of the most outstanding people among my brothers." This time, when I returned to Mount God Bestowment, he specially came to help me complete the task. Ji Tianxing immediately understood the identity of the young man in the golden robe. He cupped his hands and said, "It's the 7th Xianxia. Nice to meet you." The 7th Xianxia nodded with a smile and said, "Don't be so polite. My surname is Taihao and my name is Yunqi. You can call me Brother Yunqi. Or you can call me Brother Yunqi like Jiujio, or you can call me Brother Yunqi." Taihao Yunqi's manner of speech and demeanor were quite refined and elegant. It made people feel as if they were bathing in the spring breeze and would not feel bored at all. However, Ji Tianxing could feel that Taihao Yunqi only had a good temperament, but there was a sense of pride and arrogance in him. It was an innate sense of nobility and pride that came from the depths of his soul and was deeply ingrained. He would smile at people, and there was no sense of arrogance in his words. On the surface, he looked very kind. However, in the depths of his heart, he would never take ordinary people seriously. "I'm the Xianxia of God, and I've known Jiujio for a long time. I've even become the first disciple of God. That's why Taihao Yunqi looks at me differently and is pleasant to me. If other disciples of God were here, I'm afraid he wouldn't even be interested in them." This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and he carefully looked at Taihao Yunqi. He realized that Taihao Yunqi's strength was unfathomable, far beyond Ji Bai and Shohei. He was at least at the 5th level of the tribulation stage. Just as Ji Tianxing was pondering, Jiujio and Taihao Yunqi had already taken their seats. Jiujio looked at Ji Tianxing expectantly. Her eyes were shining as she quickly asked, "Tianxing, I came back late and missed the Disciple of God assessment." Chapter 1637. Both Ji Tianxing and Taihao Yunqi were stunned by Jiujio's words. Ji Tianxing smiled and shook his head. "Your Highness Jiujio, it's been almost 2 months. Let's not talk about it." Taihao Yunqi also revealed a smile and nodded in agreement. "Jiujio, didn't the Great Guardian report the situation to you? Why do you ask Ji Tianxing to tell you again? Moreover, those young geniuses are only in the primordial soul realm. What can they do? It's fine if you don't listen." Taihao Yunqi patted Jiujio's head affectionately as he spoke. His tone was casual as he spoke. It was obvious that he did not take Ji Tianxing and the God's disciples seriously. It was as though the battle between the young geniuses and the God's disciples was like a fight between ants. Ji Tianxing was even more certain of his judgment. Taihao Yunqi's temperament was just as he had guessed. Jiujio pouted as a look of disappointment flashed across her eyes. "But I'll ask Tianxing to tell me more in the future." Taihao Yunqi nodded and smiled. "Our mission is almost complete. Now there's only one thing left. What do you say? Or should I say it?" Jiujio volunteered. "Let me tell Tianxing." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and looked at Jiujio calmly. Jiujio looked at him sincerely and said slowly, "Tianxing, I've returned to the God's kingdom for the past 6 months and reported everything about you to Father. Although Father has been cultivating in seclusion, he left a clone in the God's kingdom." When Jiujio said this, Taihao Yunqi clearly frowned and secretly sent a voice transmission to remind her. Jiujio's body trembled. She quickly skipped that part and continued, "Father God has already noticed you and is very optimistic about your future. Therefore, Father God sent down a divine decree to let the clear heaven pagoda focus on nurturing you, hoping that you can stay on Mount God bestowment and cultivate in peace. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly when he heard this. Jiu, I told you about this. I won't be staying on God Rank Mountain forever, and I'll be leaving soon. As for the reason, you should be well aware of it. The brilliance in Jiu's eyes dimmed. She nodded and said, Tianxing, of course I can understand your feelings. I also hope that you can find your wife soon and reunite with her. However, the father and I both hope that you can stay. I even discussed with Father God that after you find your wife, you can also bring her to Mount God bestowment. Father God will show mercy and let your wife become a God's disciple, so that you two can live together. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a while. Then he shook his head and said, Jiu, thank you and Mr. God Lord for your kindness. But I'm afraid it's hard to realize. He knew that Yun Yao's identity was special. She was the reincarnation of goddess Yao Guang, and also someone personally appointed by Luo Shui martial god. More than 20 years ago, Luo Shui martial god had secretly ordered the palace lord to set up this plan. Now, Yun Yao had finally entered Luo Shui divine kingdom and was cultivating there. How could Luo Shui martial god let her go? Jiu's little face showed a trace of disappointment, and she was a little depressed. Taihao Yunqi also frowned and said in a low voice, Ji Tianxing, you should know how difficult and glorious it is to become a god's disciple under Father God. Every 20 years, hundreds of top geniuses from the 6 empires gather at the peak of God Rank Mountain. In the end, 90 people will be eliminated, and only the 10 strongest will become a god's disciple. Father God is willing to show mercy and grant your wife the status of a god's disciple. This is his care for you. You must cherish it. Ji Tianxing glanced at Taihao Yunqi and said indifferently, although Taihao Divine Lord has good intentions, my wife doesn't need the status of a god's disciple. Taihao Yunqi frowned and looked disappointed. He sighed and said, Ji Tianxing, I've long heard that you are arrogant and unyielding, and your words and actions are unreasonably arrogant. I didn't expect it to be true. In addition, you are deeply in love with your wife. In the eyes of ordinary people, this is admirable and admirable. But in the eyes of us experts, it is extremely foolish. Taihao Yunqi showed a look of exasperation as he lectured Ji Tianxing in a serious tone. With your talent and the noble status of the Son of God, you will definitely become a martial expert in the future, and even a saint emperor. When that time comes, you can have any woman you want. Even if it is a beauty that can cause the downfall of a country, you can choose. As a genius martial artist, you should understand that only powerful martial strength is worth pursuing. As long as you have enough strength, power and beauty will be at your fingertips. When Jiu heard this, she vaguely felt that something was wrong and could not help but frown. Seventh brother, don't say any more. Let's listen to Tianxing's thoughts. Only then did Taihao Yunqi shut his mouth and looked at Ji Tianxing indifferently. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said calmly, Brother Yunqi and I have different views. It's fine if you don't say anything. Taihao Yunqi immediately frowned, his face full of disappointment. Jiu hurriedly waved her small hand and tried to smooth things over. Seventh brother, Tianxing, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's talk about it later. After that, she looked at Ji Tianxing and said solemnly, Tianxing, before I came to Mount God bestowment, Father God gave me a mission. Father God wants to see you personally and has some questions to ask you. So, I hope you can come with us to the kingdom of God. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked, How long will it take to go from here to the kingdom of God? Jiu answered truthfully, If it's fast, it'll take half a month. If it's slow, it'll take a month. Ji Tianxing decisively shook his head and refused. In a few days, I'll be leaving Mount God bestowment to participate in the 3 kingdoms of God. I definitely won't be able to go to the kingdom of God. There won't be enough time. Jiu smiled and hurriedly waved her hand. No, Tianxing, don't worry about this problem. The 3 kingdoms of God exchange has always been held in the ruins of God. There's a space-time passage in the kingdoms of God that leads directly to the ruins of God. Come with us to the kingdom of God. After meeting Father God, you can pass through the space-time passage and reach the ruins of God. There's definitely enough time. Ji Tianxing remained silent and frowned as he weighed the pros and cons. Jiao saw that he was wavering and added, Tianxing, I already know about the grudge between you and the Chu Yun Empire. Forgive me for being blunt, but with your current strength, I'm afraid it'll be difficult to resist the Chu Yun Empire's revenge. If you want to solve the problem completely, the best way is to meet Father God. No matter how powerful the Chu Yun Empire is, they are still Father God's people and must obey Father God's orders. You should understand what I mean, right? Jiao's words hit the nail on the head. Ji Tianxing immediately nodded and agreed. Chapter 1638. Seeing Ji Tianxing agree, Jiao heaved a sigh of relief. This was one of the missions that Divine Lord Taihao had given her. She wanted to complete the mission and also let Ji Tianxing meet Divine Lord Taihao. After all, only the Divine Sons, Divine Daughters, and the Divine Emperors of the 6 states had the right to meet the Divine Lord. It was a great honor for Ji Tianxing to be summoned by the Divine Lord. She naturally hoped that Ji Tianxing would receive this honor. Taihao Yunqi was not moved. His expression was calm, and he even felt that this was how it should be. In his opinion, if it were any other ordinary young genius, being summoned by the Divine Lord would be an honor that would be hard to come by in 3 lifetimes. No one could refuse such a lofty honor. But Taihao Yunqi did not know that Ji Tianxing had only agreed to go to the Divine Nation because he wanted to resolve the matter of the Outcloud Empire. He did not care about honor or luck. In any case, he did not plan to stay on God's Sealing Mountain for long. In the future, he would eventually meet up with Yun Yao. Ji Tianxing waited in Heaven's Saint Palace for an entire day. After Jiao and Taihao Yunqi finished dealing with other matters, they set off with Ji Tianxing the next morning. The 3 of them left God's Sealing Mountain together. Taihao Yunqi took out a silver flying ship and carried Ji Tianxing and Jiao toward the north. This flying ship was a superior-grade tribulation magic treasure. It flew extremely quickly, like a bolt of lightning streaking across the sky. Taihao Yunqi steered the flying ship while Ji Tianxing and Jiao stayed in the ship and chatted idly. After a day, the 2 of them had finished talking about everything they could talk about. Thus, Ji Tianxing silently meditated and cultivated while Jiao returned to her room to sleep. About 5 days later, the flying ship arrived at the depths of a vast ice plain and began to fly high into the sky. Ji Tianxing could vaguely sense that the flying ship continued to ascend, passing through layers of clouds and reaching a height of 30,000 feet above the ground. This was the Heavenly Dipper energy layer, and the sky was filled with violent winds and astral fire. Ordinary primordial spirit experts would not dare to stay in the Heavenly Dipper chi layer. If he stayed here for too long, his body would surely be minced into pieces by the heavenly winds, his soul core would be incinerated by the flames, and he would be obliterated in the end. Only tribulation transcendence experts could travel through the Heavenly Dipper chi layer. Outside the atmosphere of the Big Dipper, there was a dark and boundless void. The void was cold and gloomy. It was a complete vacuum. There was not a trace of air, nor was there any heaven and earth spiritual chi. In the pitch-black void, there was a mysterious 5-colored vortex. The silver flying boat entered the vortex and flew quickly and silently as if it had entered a splendid tunnel. A few hours later, the flying boat finally flew out of the space-time tunnel and entered a colorful world. After finishing his cultivation, Ji Tianxing walked out of the room and stood on the bow of the airboat. He looked ahead and surveyed his surroundings. He saw that the sky was as blue as if it had just been washed, and below him was a myriad of colorful mountains and rivers. As far as the eye could see, there were green mountains and clear waters everywhere. White clouds and thick fog lingered around the mountaintops. Birds chirped and apes howled in the mountains. There were several large rivers at the foot of the mountains that looked like pearls and jade ribbons that sparkled under the sunlight. There were also groups of spirit cranes that flew above the water and let out crisp cries. The extremely dense heaven and earth spiritual chi condensed into strands of 5-colored spirit fog in the air that drifted along with the breeze. Not only was the heaven and earth spiritual qi several times denser than that of the Shenwu continent, but there was also an invisible power that filled the world. The aura of this power was sacred and boundless, and it could invisibly strengthen a martial artist's body and cleanse their spirit. Ji Tianxing could clearly feel that his mind had become calm and peaceful in this world, and many distracting thoughts had been cleansed and purified. Invisibly, he even had the illusion that he had become one with the world, and all sorts of insights appeared in his mind. The sword intent that he had comprehended during the previous battle had also become more profound. These various changes shocked Ji Tianxing and made him feel incredulous. Is this the legendary divine kingdom of Taihao? Sure enough, there's an invisible divine power enveloping this place. It's worthy of being called a holy land of the martial Tao. It's no wonder that the young geniuses of the Six Nations dream of entering Mount Godseal and becoming an honorary disciple. Becoming a god disciple would have the opportunity to study in a divine kingdom or take up a position there. Cultivating in such an environment would increase one's innate talent, and the speed at which one's strength would increase would be extremely fast. Even if one couldn't become a god disciple, one could still enjoy the generous environment of a divine kingdom as a servant. It's a pity that the geniuses of the Six Nations were so unlucky this time. Something happened at the Divine Glacier Mine, and those who were eliminated have all gone to mine. Just as Ji Tianxing was silently sighing, an area that flickered with golden light appeared at the end of the horizon in front of him. As the flying vessel flew past the mountains and rapidly approached the area, Ji Tianxing could gradually see it clearly. It was a huge city with an imposing aura. It was a city in the clouds that flickered with golden light. The huge ancient city was at least 150 kilometers wide, and it floated in the sea of clouds above the mountains. The city walls were 300 meters tall, and they were extremely majestic. There were many tall buildings in the city, and there were rows of magnificent palaces and towers that reached into the clouds. The setting sun in the afternoon shone on the huge city, and the countless glazed roofs reflected a dazzling golden light. Thick clouds and fog surrounded the huge city, and it didn't dissipate no matter how strong the wind blew. It even covered the huge city with a mysterious veil. Ji Tianxing looked at the ancient city from afar, and he only felt that it was both real and illusory. It was like a heavenly palace or a blessed land of immortals. Soon, the flying vessel arrived outside the towering city and landed at the south gate. 2 rows of guards in golden armor stood at the foot of the city gate that was 300 meters tall. Each of them had a dignified aura and were extraordinarily mighty. Swoosh! With a flash of light, Taihao Yunqi put away the silver flying vessel. He, Ji Tianxing, and Jiao appeared and stood side by side at the city gate. The guards in golden armor guarding the city gate were about to interrogate the 3 of them about their identities and intentions. Seeing Taihao Yunqi and Jiao, the guards in golden armor were stunned. Then, a look of reverence appeared on their faces, and they respectfully knelt down to pay their respects. Greetings, 7th Son of God. Greetings, Your Highness Jiao. The 2 rows of guards in golden armor knelt on both sides of the city gate respectfully. Taihao Yunqi ignored the guards, and led Jiao and Ji Tianxing into the city through the city gate. The guards in golden armor didn't stand up until the 3 of them were far away, and they started to whisper to each other. The 7th Prince and His Highness have returned from the lower world. Why did they bring back a young man? I heard that the 7th Prince and His Highness went to Mount Godsealing. That young man should be a disciple of Mount Godsealing, right? It shouldn't be. The 7th Prince and His Highness personally escorted him to the holy nation? No disciple of God would receive such treatment. That white-robed young man must be extraordinary. There must be something special about him. Chapter 1639. Ji Tianxing, Jiao, and Taihao Yunqi walked side by side on the wide Jade Road. This straight and wide road led from the southern city gate to the plaza in the center of the city. After passing through the plaza in the center of the city, they continued to walk toward the northern district, where they saw an exceptionally sacred and magnificent palace complex. This was Taihao Palace. There were very few pedestrians on the Jade Road, and the ground was very clean and tidy. Many statues and stone tablets were erected on both sides of the road. Streets and alleys crisscrossed through the city. Rows of tall buildings and pagodas, as well as many exquisite palaces, were arranged in neat rows, making for a very grand sight. As the three walked, Jiao explained the situation of Taihao Kingdom to Ji Tianxing. This is Taihao City. 60% of the entire kingdom's martial artists are gathered here, and there are close to 6 million people. There are many spirit veins and precious lands outside the city, and there are many villages and tribes scattered around. Many rare races live here. Although it's called a kingdom, it's actually a small world. It's a secret realm that has existed since ancient times, and it's connected to Shenwu continent. Ji Tianxing nodded and asked doubtfully, "Along the way, I saw that most of the commoners in the city are at least at the primordial spirit realm, and there are almost no ordinary people. Are the 5 million martial artists in the city all geniuses and powerhouses selected from the 6 great empires?" Jiao shook her head and explained, "Not all of them, except for a few who came from the lower realms. Most of them are originally citizens of the kingdom." Ji Tianxing was surprised and asked in disbelief, "The natives here actually have such powerful martial talent, and all of them can reach the primordial spirit realm?" Jiao revealed a proud expression and nodded. "Although not all of them can reach the primordial spirit realm, they are close. After all, this is Father's kingdom. It has the most abundant cultivation resources in the world, and it's also protected by Father's divine power. Not to mention humans, even a bird or a demon beast can become in essence soul realm demon supremacy after a few hundred years of nourishment from divine power." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with some emotion, "It's truly blessed by the heavens. As expected of a kingdom, it's a miracle. By the way, why are there so many rare races living in the villages and tribes outside of Taihao City?" Jiao thought for a moment and explained, "It said that in ancient times, there were tens of thousands of races on the continent. However, after a huge calamity and upheaval, many races perished. By the time Father took control of Taihao's kingdom, the various races were on the verge of extinction. Father was merciful, and he could not bear to see the ancient times, so he brought some races that were on the verge of extinction to the kingdom. After tens of thousands of years of reproduction, the races that were about to disappear are now thriving again." Ji Tianxing nodded again and smiled. "Divine Lord Taihao, this is a good move. God by God. By God by Jiao. By Jiao by God." The two of them chatted as they walked. Before they knew it, they had passed through the northern city district and arrived at the gates of the vast divine palace. Only at close range did Ji Tianxing truly realize how majestic and divine Taihao Divine Palace was. 2 lifelike golden dragons were carved on the 1,000-foot-tall palace gates. The 4 golden words Taihao Divine Palace were carved on the lintel, exuding the domineering aura of a sovereign who looked down on the world. Below the palace gates, the Divine Palace guards wore golden armor. They all had sabers at their waists and golden halberds in their hands. The insignia of Taihao Divine Kingdom was embroidered on their chests. When Ji Tianxing's group of 3 stepped through the palace gates, the guards on both sides knelt down and bowed, their postures extremely respectful and pious. After entering the Divine Palace, Taihao Yunqi parted ways with Ji Tianxing and Jiao. He left alone to report to God Lord Taihao and take care of some matters. Jiao led Ji Tianxing through the majestic palaces and into a palace called Rui. This resplendent palace was Jiao's personal residence. It was her personal residence. Inside and outside the palace, there were more than 100 golden armored guards and more than 100 maids and divine servants. Jiao settled Ji Tianxing in a guest room on the first floor, not far from the guest hall. Ji Tianxing meditated in the room and waited patiently for an entire afternoon. Only when night fell did Jiao come to find him. "Tianxing, I just reported to Godfather. I will now take you to see him." "Okay, thank you for your trouble." Ji Tianxing nodded and followed her out of the room. A few moments later, Jiao led him deep into the palace and into a bright and spacious study. The study was rather large and luxuriously decorated. It was a dazzling sight of gold everywhere. Under the northern wall, there was a large purple jade desk and a large purple jade throne inlaid with gems. On the desk were several ancient texts, a bronze incense burner, and a mysterious black stone half the height of a person. The black stone was oval-shaped and made of an unknown material. It flickered with white light and its use was unknown. Ji Tianxing looked around and saw that there was only him and Jiao in the study. He asked, Jiao, aren't you taking me to see the Divine Master? Why are you in the study? Jiao chuckled, Tianxing, don't worry. Godfather is always in seclusion. Even I can't see his real body. Usually, when I report to Godfather, I communicate with him through the divine stone. With that, she formed a spell with both hands and shot out a dazzling white light into the mysterious black stone on the desk. Swoosh! The mysterious black stone lit up with a dazzling white light and condensed into a tall and mighty figure. This was a middle-aged man wearing a golden robe. He was tall and sturdy and had a dignified face. His clothes were simple and plain, but his thick eyebrows revealed a domineering aura. His deep eyes contained wisdom that could see through everything. Ji Tianxing recognized him at a glance. This white-robed man was Martial God Taihao. Of course, this was only the projection of Martial God Taihao's clone. Jiao looked at Martial God Taihao with a smile. She bowed and reported, Godfather, Jiao has brought Tianxing here. Martial God Taihao looked at her kindly and waved his hand. Jiao, you can leave now. Don't let anyone come close. Godfather has something to talk to him alone. Jiao was startled. She pointed at the tip of her nose and pouted, Godfather, even I can't listen? Of course. Martial God Taihao nodded slightly. His tone was kind but contained an unquestionable authority. Jiao pouted and nodded. All right, Jiao will leave now. With that, she quickly left the study and cast a spell to activate the defensive formation of the study. Chapter 1640. The secret room was so quiet that even the drop of a needle could be heard. Ji Tianxing and Martial God Taihao's clone looked at each other in silence. After a long while, Ji Tianxing finally spoke and broke the silence in the secret chamber. Greetings, Divine Master, he greeted Martial God Taihao with a cupped fist salute. Martial God Taihao finally came back to his senses. His expression was complicated as he said slowly, You're too similar. Not only do you look the same, even your bloodline and aura are the same. Ji Tianxing had been mistaken for Martial God Taihao a few times before, so he wasn't surprised by Martial God Taihao's reaction. He smiled and asked, Divine Master, are you talking about Kenshin? Of course. Martial God Taihao nodded and looked at him with sparkling eyes. He asked, If your cultivation wasn't so weak, I would have thought that he had returned. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and smiled meaningfully. He asked, If he really did return, how would you react? Martial God Taihao was clearly taken aback. He looked at Ji Tianxing playfully and said, Although I don't believe that someone who has been dead for 1,000 years can come back to life, I don't believe that someone who has been dead for 1,000 years can be reborn. However, if he really does come back to life, I'll be happy for him. Ji Tianxing nodded and thought to himself, In Kenshin's memory, Kenshin and Martial God Taihao were good friends. After all, Kenshin had taught Martial God Taihao before. They had no grudges or conflicts of interest. Martial God Taihao should be trustworthy. Martial God Taihao sighed and said with a wry smile, Unfortunately, you're Ji Tianxing. You can only be Kenshin's successor. You're not him. Besides, I can guess what you're thinking. You don't need to test my attitude. If I was hostile to you, you would have disappeared a long time ago. How could you still be alive? Ji Tianxing nodded and said calmly, I've made a fool of myself in front of the Divine Lord. But I still want to ask, why did the Divine Lord summon me? Martial God Taihao said in a deep voice, Firstly, I would like to meet an old friend from 1,000 years ago. You might not be him, but you look very much like him. Secondly, I owe him a favor and have never had the chance to return it. If I return this favor to his successor, Perhaps he will feel gratified in the underworld. Martial god Taihao looked at Ji Tianxing sternly and said solemnly, Ji Tianxing, I know everything that has happened in the past 6 months since you entered Mount God Seal. Your talent is extraordinary, and your future is promising. As expected of the successor of Kenshin. Although you are now the #1 God's disciple, a God's disciple is only equivalent to my disciple in name. You can't be compared to the Son of God. Now, I want to take you in as my last disciple. If you agree, you will be my only disciple, and your status will be equivalent to the eldest son of God. Ji Tianxing frowned when he heard martial god Taihao's words, and a look of shock flashed across his eyes. He knew very well that although martial god Taihao had 99 children, he had never taken in a single disciple in his entire life. If he agreed, he would become martial god Taihao's only disciple, and his status would instantly rise by more than 10 times. Martial god Taihao's last disciple would definitely be one of the most respected figures in the Taihao kingdom. Even in the entire Shenwu continent, he would be one of the most respected figures in the world. If Ji Tianxing agreed, then he would have a meteoric rise, reaching the heavens in a single bound. From then on, he would be able to reside in the Taihao kingdom and enjoy the best treatment and cultivation resources. With martial god Taihao as his backer, almost no one would be able to threaten him. However, Ji Tianxing still shook his head and refused after weighing the pros and cons for a moment. Lord Deity, Kenshin gave you pointers in the past, but unfortunately he left this continent before you could return the favor. This matter caused you to feel regret in your heart. Now, you want to return this favor to me. I can understand your feelings, and I am very grateful for your decision. However, I am very sorry that I cannot agree to it. Ji Tianxing's tone was very calm, but it was also very stubborn and resolute. Martial god Taihao frowned and revealed a look of disbelief. He asked, Ji Tianxing, have you really thought it through? You actually rejected me so straightforwardly? I know that your current situation is very bad. Not only are you enemies with the Outcloud Empire, but you are also being targeted by the powerhouses of the Ghost Clan. If you agree to this matter and become my last disciple, all of your problems will be easily solved. Ji Tianxing shook his head and smiled. A treasured sword's edge is sharpened, and the fragrance of plum blossoms comes from the bitter cold. Back then, Kenshin roamed the Shenwu continent and slaughtered his way from the west to the east. In a short 30 years, he became a saint. What he relied on was not the protection of powerhouses, but the sword in his hand and his tenacious heart. As Kenshin's successor, I naturally want to imitate him. No matter what difficulties or dangers I face, I will solve them myself. Martial god Taihao listened quietly and stared at him in silence for a long time. After about 10 breaths of time, martial god Taihao revealed a gentle smile and nodded. You really are too much like him. How great would it be if you were him? Since you have such aspirations, I will not force you. Of course, I will still deal with the matter of the Outcloud Empire. The 6 great empires have existed for thousands of years in peace and stability. I will not allow anyone to break this balance and cause chaos in the divine kingdoms. Ji Tianxing nodded in agreement and asked, Since the Lord Deity already understands the cause of this matter, how will you deal with it? Martial god Taihao said in a dignified tone, The current chaotic situation was caused by Emperor Outcloud's greed. If he had not been so greedy, why would he have fallen into your trap and given up on the Outcloud Empire? I have already ordered the eldest son to lead the Divine Might Legion to the Outcloud Empire to capture Emperor Outcloud. He will be suppressed in the Divine Kingdom's endless black prison and suffer for 100 years. Ji Tianxing said calmly, Emperor Outcloud made a grave mistake and committed such a sin. The Lord Deity is only imprisoning him in the prison for 100 years. You are truly merciful. Martial god Taihao glanced at him and smiled. Ji Tianxing, you probably don't know about the endless black prison. Ask Jiu when you have the chance. In addition, the great Emperor Chu Yun was once my disciple and a rare martial sage expert. I can't kill him because of this, can I? Letting him reflect in the endless black prison for 100 years is already a severe punishment. Ji Tianxing saw that martial god Taihao had made up his mind and did not say anything else. He naturally hoped that martial god Taihao would give the order to kill Emperor Outcloud to prevent future troubles. However, this was not realistic. There were only a dozen martial saints in the entire divine kingdom. Killing one meant one less. Chapter 1641. Martial god Taihao had already concluded what would happen to great Emperor Chu Yun, so Ji Tianxing could not say anything. He thought to himself that he might become a martial saint in 100 years. By then, even if great Emperor Chu Yun wanted to take revenge on him, he would not be afraid. He thought for a while and thought of another question. He asked, "Divine Master, great Emperor Chu Yun will be locked in the boundless dark prison to reflect on his actions for 100 years. What about the Chu Yun Empire? Without a martial saint, there will be more chaos." Martial god Taihao smiled and said confidently, "I have already made arrangements for this. You don't have to worry. The first divine son's strength and experience have been honed. He can take on a heavy responsibility. In the next 100 years, the first divine son will temporarily take over the position of divine emperor and control the entire Chu Yun Empire." Ji Tianxing was relieved. He stopped asking about the Chu Yun Empire and changed the topic. "Divine Master, you mentioned the ghost race just now. I believe you know about the Glacier Divine Mine, right?" Martial god Taihao nodded slightly and said calmly, "For nearly 10,000 years, the ghost race has been holed up in the North Underworld Mountain. They have never shown themselves and outsiders have not been able to enter. The ghost race has not been active on the continent for so long that the other races have almost forgotten about their existence. I did not expect them to leave the North Underworld Mountain and go to the Glacier Divine Mine to cause trouble and kill so many miners. Fortunately, you disguised yourself as a divine servant and took care of the two ghost race that caused the disaster. You also chased away the demon king hiding in the glacier. Otherwise, the trouble in the Glacier Divine Mine would have lasted for a few more months until the second divine son personally went to investigate." Ji Tianxing's body shook. His eyes were filled with shock. "Divine Master, you even know that I disguised myself as a divine servant and secretly killed the two blood gods?" He thought that he had done it secretly. He did not expect martial god Taihao to expose him. Only now did he believe that martial god Taihao was like the eye of a god. He looked down on his territory and could see through everything. Martial god Taihao smiled and said in a dignified tone, "In my territory, as long as I want to know, I will know." The cold ice martial lord, who was in charge of the Glacier Divine Mine, deliberately concealed the news. He could not deal with the disaster in time and did not report it in time. This god has already given the order to punish him severely. That devil monarch of the ghost race hiding in the Arctic abyss had long fled upon hearing the news. Now, the Glacier Divine Mine has returned to normal. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment, then asked, "Divine Lord, since the Ghost Clan has been hiding in the North Underworld Mountain for nearly 10,000 years and has never moved around the continent, why are you still here? Why did they leave the North Underworld Mountain and run to the Glacier Divine Mine to cause trouble?" Martial god Taihao looked at him playfully and said meaningfully, "Not only did a few Ghost Clan experts run to the Glacier Divine Mine to cause trouble, my spies have also found out that a large group of Ghost Clan experts have left the North Underworld Mountain and are moving around in my territory. As for why they left North Underworld Mountain and started to move around the continent, you should know better than I do. Their target is you." Ji Tianxing frowned and fell silent for a moment before saying, "Divine Lord, to tell you the truth, when I first came to the Shenwu continent from the Tianxian continent, I was chasing after the ancestral demon god. You should have heard of the legend of the ancestral demon god, right?" Martial god Taihao frowned, and a look of disbelief flashed across his eyes. He asked in astonishment, "The ancestral demon god? You chased it all the way to the Shenwu continent? How is that possible?" Of course, this god knows about the legend of the ancestral demon god. The ancestral demon god was the primogenitor of the ancient demon race, and it was also one of the reasons for the ancient war. During the ancient war, countless deities and powerhouses from various races were massacred by it. It led 3,000 blood gods and wantonly massacred the people and powerhouses of various races, causing the ancient races to wither and perish. Today, 99% of the ancient races have perished, and only a few hundred races are left. But didn't the ancestral demon god fall during the ancient war? After the ancestral demon god fell, the remaining demons on the Shenwu continent were encircled and annihilated by the various races. Those that escaped the net retreated to Dark North Mountain and changed their names to the ghost race. They never dared to appear in the world again. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Originally, the ancestral fiend god had fallen in the ancient war. But no one expected that a trace of its spirit remained, and it slept in the blood river of the demon race's sacred land for 30,000 years. After that, the demon king tried everything to revive the ancestral demon god. Although I killed the demon king, I couldn't do anything to the ancestral demon god, and it escaped here." After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Martial God Taihao came to a realization and nodded. "So that's how it is. A trace of the ancestral demon god's spirit was not destroyed, and it slept for 30,000 years before being reborn. This is simply inconceivable." When he thought of this, Martial God Taihao looked deeply at Ji Tianxing, and a thought flashed through his mind like lightning. The ancestral demon god managed to preserve a trace of its spirit and was reborn after 30,000 years. Kenshin was revered as the king of gods back then. Did he really fall? Will he be like the ancestral demon god and be reborn after 1,000 years? Just as Martial God Taihao was deep in thought, Ji Tianxing spoke. "Godlord, the ancestral demon god has most likely fled back to Dark North Mountain. It must be conserving its strength and quickly recovering its vitality. Once it recovers, it will definitely lead all the demons to sweep through the Shenwu continent and cause another bloody catastrophe. I suggest that you act as soon as possible and kill it before it recovers. Otherwise, it will be too late to act when it matures in the future." Martial God Taihao nodded and said solemnly, "Ji Tianxing, I will seriously consider your suggestion. I will also send the Shenwei Legion to clean up the ghosts that have intruded into my territory. However, Dark North Mountain has been a forbidden area since ancient times, and it is extremely dangerous. Even my Shenwei Legion will find it difficult to enter that forbidden area, and it will be even more impossible to wipe out all the ghosts. Also, I am currently in seclusion to comprehend a divine art. I will not be able to come out for a while, and I will not be able to act personally." Ji Tianxing immediately understood what Martial God Taihao meant and could not help but frown. Martial God Taihao is currently in seclusion. A martial god like him can stay in seclusion for decades or even centuries. He cannot personally deal with the ancestral demon god, and the Shenwei Legion cannot attack Dark North Mountain. The only thing he can do is kill all the demons that enter the territories of the Six Nations, but this will not affect the foundation of the demons. When he thought of this, Ji Tianxing let out a long sigh. "I can only hope that the ancestral demon god will not recover its peak strength within 100 years, and it will not attack Dark North Mountain." Chapter 1642. Ji Tianxing hated the demon clan to the core and wished he could kill the ancestor demon god as soon as possible to prevent future troubles. However, Martial God Taihao had never dealt with the demon clan before and had no enmity with them. Naturally, he would not be as anxious as him. Moreover, Martial God Taihao was in seclusion and would not come out in a short period of time. Ji Tianxing could only drop the matter and did not mention it again. Martial God Taihao continued, "Ji Tianxing, the previous Kingdom Exchange Conference will be held in the Ruins of God. Every exchange conference was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for God's disciples from different countries. After you go to the Ruins of God, you must perform well. Perhaps you will have an incredible harvest." Ji Tianxing nodded to show that he understood and asked, "What is the great opportunity that the God Master is talking about?" Martial God Taihao was silent for a moment before he opened his mouth to explain. "This will have to start from the origin of the Ruins of God. The Ruins of God originated from the ancient era and appeared after the ancient war. Legend has it that it was the world of the gods, but it was destroyed in the ancient war and became a ruin. There are also some legends that say that it is the resting place of the ancient gods and there are countless tombs of the gods buried there. There is a mysterious messenger who guards the ruins of God for his entire life. Everyone calls him the Old Man of God. Every time the Kingdom Exchange Conference is held, the Old Man of God will secretly observe it. If there is an outstanding talent or a peerless genius, the Old Man of God will appear and choose this genius to enter the ruins of God. In the past few thousand years, there have been more than 10 peerless geniuses who were lucky enough to be chosen by the Old Man of God and entered the ruins of God. After these geniuses entered the ruins of God, they all had shocking gains. They either obtained ancient divine items or the inheritance of an ancient god. In the end, these geniuses became the most dazzling experts in the continent and basically all reached the martial sage realm. After listening to martial god Taihao's explanation, Ji Tianxing came to a realization and nodded. I see. The ruins of God is equivalent to the graveyard of the ancient gods and there are countless divine Tao inheritances buried there. In the past few thousand years, only a dozen geniuses were chosen by the Old Man of God and were lucky enough to enter the ruins of God. In that case, the Old Man of God's appearance is extremely rare. He might not appear in this Kingdom Exchange Conference? Martial God Taihao nodded slightly and said, Exactly. Whether or not the Old Man of the godly ruins will appear depends on whether or not there are any peerless geniuses among the gods' disciples of the three divine kingdoms. Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a calm expression, If that's the case, then we can only let nature take its course. This matter cannot be forced. Martial God Taihao was just reminding him. He did not have high hopes. Then he changed the topic and said, Ji Tianxing, I heard from Jiao that you are looking for your lost wife? Exactly. Martial God Taihao said gently, It's like looking for a needle in a haystack if you want to find her on your own. Why don't I issue an order for the spies of the various empires to help you find them? You'll definitely be able to reunite with your wife soon. Ji Tianxing bowed and said, Thank you for your kindness, Divine Lord, but there's no need for that. I've already found her tracks. I'll be able to see her and reunite with her during the Kingdom Exchange Conference. Martial God Taihao raised his eyebrows. His eyes flickered with astonishment. Is your wife a god disciple of the other two kingdoms? Ji Tianxing did not hide it. He admitted it openly. That's right, my wife is now under martial god Luo Shui. Martial god Taihao would find out about it sooner or later with his ability. He might as well be honest with him, which made him seem more upright. Martial god Taihao frowned slightly and asked in a deep voice, So you won't be returning to Mount God's ceiling after the Kingdom Exchange Conference? Ji Tianxing looked at him calmly and said solemnly, To be honest, I'll try to reunite with my wife. I might not be able to stay on Mount God's ceiling. However, I'll remember the Divine Lord's kindness and care. If the Divine Lord needs me in the future, I'll do my best to repay the Divine Lord's kindness. Martial God Taihao was silent for a while before he smiled and said in a playful tone, I'm only taking care of you because of Kenshin. Why would I need you to repay me? Besides, it'll be at least a few thousand years before I need you. With martial god Taihao's strength and status, he was one of the three giants of the Shenwu continent. Why would he care about Ji Tianxing's repayment and help? Ji Tianxing also understood this point, so he didn't say anything else. Martial god Taihao continued, Everyone has their own aspirations, so I won't force you. If you want to go to Luo Shui Kingdom, go ahead. After all, you're a descendant of Kenshin. If Luo Shui knows about this, he'll definitely take good care of you. Of course, whenever you want to return to Taihao Kingdom, Mount God's ceiling will always open its doors to you. Martial god Taihao's tone and expression were calm and indifferent. He seemed very tolerant and open-minded. Ji Tianxing bowed and cupped his hands. Many thanks for the Divine Lord's help. Martial god Taihao nodded slightly. You must remember not to forget your original intentions. Don't ruin Kenshin's reputation. Alright, you may go. After he finished speaking, martial god Taihao's clone projection gradually dissipated and soon disappeared. The dazzling white light disappeared, and the mysterious black stone became dim. The study quieted down, and the light returned to normal. Ji Tianxing quietly pondered for a moment before turning to leave. When he walked out of the study, he saw Jiu standing outside. She had a gloomy expression on her face as she pouted and counted the time with her fingers. When she saw Ji Tianxing come out, she immediately revealed a joyful expression and hurried over to welcome him. Tianxing, you're finally out. Are you done talking to father? What did you talk about? Jiu raised her head and looked at Ji Tianxing. Her small face was filled with anticipation, and her big round eyes were filled with excitement. Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "The Divine Lord told me about the Kingdom Exchange Conference. He mentioned the ruins of God and the messengers of ruins of God. He asked me to perform well." Jiu nodded and said in a clear voice, Even if father didn't tell you about this, I was going to tell you. The ruins of God is the world's #1 forbidden area. Every martial artist in the world dreams of entering the secret realm. You must perform well and obtain the favor of the old man of the ruins of God. Other than this, what else did father tell you? Ji Tianxing saw that her desire for knowledge was too great. He couldn't bear to disappoint her, so he said, "The Divine Lord also told me about the Chu Yun Empire. He wants to send the eldest divine son to take over the Chu Yun Empire. He also wants to capture the Chu Yun Great Emperor and imprison him in the endless black prison to make him repent. By the way, Jiu, can you tell me about the endless black prison?" Endless black prison? Jiu's eyes widened. The smile on her small face disappeared, and her eyes were filled with fear. Chapter 1643. Jiu only revealed one sentence about the endless dark prison and did not mention anything else. Where was the endless dark prison? How terrifying was it? What dangers were there? He had no answer to any of these questions. However, Ji Tianxing knew that the great Emperor Chu Yun would not have a good life in the next 100 years. He and Jiu left the study and walked back to their residence. Along the way, Jiu pestered him with many questions to find out about his conversation with Martial God Taihao. In Jiu's opinion, Martial God Taihao did not allow her to eavesdrop and was being so mysterious. They must have talked about some secrets. Her strong curiosity made her want to get to the bottom of this matter. Ji Tianxing had a headache and could only brush her off with a few perfunctory words. He then returned to his residence to rest. After a night of recuperating and meditating, his mental state had recovered to its peak, and he only felt refreshed. The God's kingdom is indeed blessed by nature and envied by others. Meditating here for a night is equivalent to cultivating in Mount God bestowment for 3 days. Ji Tianxing made a comparison in his heart, and the result was shocking. The next morning, he found Jiu and said that he wanted to leave. He had achieved his goal of coming to the God's kingdom and there was no need for him to stay. Jiu frowned in confusion and asked, "Tianxing, you just came to the God's kingdom. Why are you in a hurry to leave? The God's disciples of Mount God bestowment have just left and it will take them at least 20 days to reach the God's ruins. If you leave now, you can reach the God's ruins in an instant and reach 20 days earlier than them. Don't you still have to wait for them? If that's the case, why don't you stay in the God's kingdom and leave when the time is near?" Ji Tianxing frowned and thought about it. He did not say anything. Jiu pulled his arm and continued to persuade him. "Tianxing, the God's ruins is very strange and dangerous. If you go alone, you might not even find the place. It's not easy for you to come to the God's kingdom. You should go and see the scenery. Even if you don't go sightseeing, you can stay in your room and cultivate. It's faster than cultivating in the lower bound." In the end, under Jiu's insistence, Ji Tianxing decided to stay in the God Kingdom for half a month. Seeing that he had finally agreed to stay, Jiu was especially happy. She hurriedly pulled him out of the hall. "Tianxing, let me take you to see the scenery of the Divine Kingdom." Regardless of whether Ji Tianxing agreed or not, Jiu pulled him out of Rui Palace. Under Jiu's orders, the captain of the guards brought over a snow-white winged Pegasus for the two of them. The heavenly horse was a divine steed. It was tall and holy, and there was not a single strand of variegated hair on its body. It emitted a faint silver light. Jiu brought Ji Tianxing onto the Pegasus. The Pegasus spread its pure white wings and flew into the sky. Shua! The heavenly horse was flying in the sky above Taihao City, gracefully circling and dancing in a leisurely manner. Jiao pointed at the buildings in the city and took the initiative to introduce them to Ji Tianxing. Tianxing, look over there. That's the market, the largest trading market in the city. Many martial artists trade there. Some rare treasures often appear there, as well as many interesting things. Seventh brother and I often go there to take a look. Over there is the tower, the tallest building in the city. It was built by the royal craftsmen of the Divine Palace. It only took 3 days to complete. And over there, the largest palace is the 100 Clans Assembly. Usually, if there are any major events of the 100 clans outside the city, they will report to the 100 Clans Assembly. Jiao continued to introduce, feeling a little excited. Ever since she first met Ji Tianxing in the Xianpin Gate, she felt that Ji Tianxing was different from the rest. He was very special. This inexplicable feeling gradually deepened as she interacted more with Ji Tianxing. Because of this, she tried her best to persuade Ji Tianxing to stay. In the depths of her heart, she always wanted to spend a few more days with Ji Tianxing. Perhaps she could understand him better. Ji Tianxing listened quietly. Occasionally, he would ask a question or two, and from time to time, he would be amused by Jiao. Unknowingly, the Pegasus carried the two of them out of Taihao City and flew out of the city. Outside Taihao City, there were rolling mountain ranges. They were basically deep mountains, great lakes, and thousands of feet high peaks. In some of the flatter mountain peaks and valleys, there were a few villages and tribes scattered around. Although these villages and towns were not big, they had a very long history. The houses and buildings had a special style. The small villages only had a few dozen families, and the population was only 100 or 200. The bigger towns had thousands of houses and buildings, and the population was as high as 10,000. Ji Tianxing stood on the back of the Pegasus and looked down at the many villages and tribes. Indeed, he saw many strange races. There was the mermaid clan who lived by the lake. They had a human body and a fish tail. There were the ancient tree shepherds who lived in the lush forest. They had the body and limbs of a big tree, but they had the head of a human. There was also a centaur tribe who lived on a hillside facing the sun. There were more than 200 people in the tribe. They all had the body of a horse, 4 hooves and a tail, but their necks were no different from humans. There were also the rare Miluo lion men, silver star wolf men, ancient willow tribe, flower spirit tribe, and so on. Ji Tianxing had never heard of most of the races. After seeing them, he felt that it was an eye-opener. There were only a few races that he had seen in the ancient books. However, this was the first time he saw them with his own eyes. About 2 hours later, the Pegasus flew deeper into the mountain range. Jiao pointed at a 2,000 feet high peak in front of them and said to Ji Tianxing, "Tianxing, that's the Moon Fox Mountain, the territory of the Moon Fox tribe. The people of the Moon Fox tribe, regardless of their gender, are very handsome and kind. They are good at making a kind of cake called the moon mark. It's very delicious. I used to visit them often." Ji Tianxing smiled and said jokingly, "You want to eat their cake, right?" "Yes." Jiao nodded and said with a smile, "I'll take you to try it. I believe you'll like it too." While they were talking, the Pegasus carried the two of them to the sky above the Moon Fox Mountain. This 2,000 feet high peak stood in the middle of the mountains. It was very beautiful and had its own good fortune. The middle of the mountain was covered by clouds and mist. The peak of the mountain was surrounded by a sea of white clouds. It was like a fairyland. The mountain peak with a radius of more than 30 miles was relatively flat. There were dense forests and grasslands growing on it. A huge 5-colored light shield covered the peak of the mountain like a sky curtain, protecting the territory of the Moon Fox tribe. When the Pegasus flew close to the 5-colored light shield, 6 Moon Fox tribe guards in silver armor came forward to welcome them. Ji Tianxing took a closer look. The 6 Moon Fox tribe guards were all young men. They were tall, handsome, and had long silver hair. Each of them had a handsome face, a pair of pointy white ears, and a pair of silver eyes. Their auras were also somewhat feminine. Chapter 1644. The 6 guards of the Moon Fox tribe recognized Jiujiu. They did not need to look at Jiujiu's identity token. They quickly opened the 5-colored light shield and bowed in unison. "Greetings, Your Highness." "Welcome to the Moon Fox tribe, Your Highness." All the guards greeted Jiujiu respectfully with smiles on their faces. Jiujiu waved at them and rode the Pegasus to the grassland at the peak of the mountain. Dozens of old houses and mansions were scattered on the flat green grass. They were all made of marble and inlaid with a large number of moonstones. At the northern end of the grassland, there was a 3-story silver palace at the edge of the forest. The palace was not big, but it had a unique design. It exuded a sacred and solemn aura. At the top of the palace, there was a statue of a mythical beast. Ji Tianxing glanced at it and vaguely saw that the white jade statue seemed to be an exceptionally handsome fox. While he was looking around, many people of the Moon Fox tribe had already gathered around him. Most of them were wearing long silver robes. Regardless of gender, age, or gender, they were all tall and slender. They were either handsome or beautiful. When the people of the Moon Fox tribe saw the Pegasus on the grassland, they all looked at Jiujiu. Everyone looked excited and expectant. They all knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Jiujiu. "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Your Highness." Jiujiu was already used to this. She smiled and waved her hand. "Everyone, please leave. I'm just here to take a look." The people of the Moon Fox tribe stood up, but they did not want to leave. They stood far away and looked at Jiujiu and Ji Tianxing with smiles. Jiujiu smiled at Ji Tianxing and explained, "The people of the Moon Fox tribe are too friendly. Every time I come, I have to disturb the entire tribe. It makes me feel a little embarrassed." Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. That's why the ancients summed it up well. Those who take advantage of others are soft-hearted. "Ah." Jiujiu was stunned. She smiled awkwardly. "It seems like what you said is true. No wonder I feel embarrassed." "That's easy. You just have to bring them some small gifts every time you come," Ji Tianxing said with a smile. "Good idea." Jiujiu nodded in agreement. The two of them chatted as they walked towards the house 1,000 feet away. It was a 2-story house with walls made of silverstar stones with fine veins. There were already some mottled traces of the vicissitudes of life. 2 silver foxes were engraved on the 2 light golden doors, giving off a somewhat demonic aura. The walls of the 2-story building in the courtyard were inlaid with rows of moonstones, forming a mysterious and special pattern that flickered with silver light. Jiujiu pointed at the small building and introduced it to Ji Tianxing. "That's Moondream's home. She makes the best pastries in the entire Moon Fox tribe." Ji Tianxing smiled and asked, "Looks like you've been here a lot." Jiujiu smiled and explained, "More than 10 years ago, I met Moondream when I was traveling around the God Nation. She provoked a group of demon beasts deep in the mountains when she was picking herbs. She was surrounded and injured, and her life was in danger. I saved her and sent her here. She let me stay here for a few days to thank me. She even made many pastries for me." Jiujiu's face was full of smiles as she talked about the past. There was a hint of pride in her words. Ji Tianxing lowered his head and looked at her with a smile on his face. He also felt a little warm in his heart. He could tell that Jiujiu and Taihao Yunqi had different natures. Although she was the most honorable goddess and the most favored princess, she did not have Taihao Yunqi's arrogance and aloofness. She was still very simple and kind. Occasionally, she would be a little muddle-headed. She was very cute. All in all, she would be very popular no matter where she went. In this martial Dao world where people's hearts are sinister and dark everywhere, I'm afraid only someone with Jiujiu's status can remain untainted by the world and maintain a pure and kind heart. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and he felt a little emotional. At this moment, a series of footsteps came from behind them. Ji Tianxing and Jiujiu stopped and turned around. They saw a woman from the Moon Fox clan in a long silver dress. She was escorted by 4 guards in silver armor, and she was walking quickly toward them. The Moon Fox woman looked to be in her early 30s. It was hard to tell her actual age. She had a seductive figure and a beautiful face. She was dressed in a luxurious robe and wore a silver crown on her head. She also held a 2-foot-long scepter in her hand. Ji Tianxing could tell that this moon fox woman's strength and temperament were extraordinary. She should be the leader of the moon fox tribe. The moon fox woman came closer and looked at Jiao respectfully. She bowed and said, "Greetings, Your Highness. It is the moon fox tribe's honor to have Your Highness here again." Jiao raised her hand and said with a smile, "You don't have to be so polite, Silver Moon Priestess. I'm just here for a walk. You don't have to accompany me." In the moon fox tribe, the Grand Priestess was the leader with the highest authority. Silver Moon bowed again and said yes to Jiao. She then looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Your Highness, may I ask who this distinguished guest is?" "My friend. I brought him to see the scenery," Jiao said with a smile. Silver Moon's eyes flashed with shock as she sized up Ji Tianxing. In her opinion, someone who could be called a friend by Jiao must have an extraordinary status. He must be someone as important as a god's son or a goddess. Although Ji Tianxing was only at the primordial soul realm, he looked calm and had an extraordinary aura. Silver Moon couldn't see through him at the moment, so she bowed slightly and greeted him, expressing her welcome. Ji Tianxing only nodded slightly in return and didn't say anything. After a while, the Silver Moon Priestess left with her guards. Jiao led Ji Tianxing to the front door of the house. She pushed the door open and stepped into the yard. A beautiful woman with a graceful figure in a silver silk dress was weaving in the courtyard. When she saw Jiao and Ji Tianxing enter, she quickly stood up and bowed in surprise. "Your Highness, why are you here?" Jiao nodded with a smile and said, "I'm here to see you. I also brought my friend to try your cooking." Then she introduced Ji Tianxing. "Tianxing, this is Moon Dream." Moon Dream bowed to Ji Tianxing and exchanged a few pleasantries. Then she pulled Jiao and said eagerly, "Your Highness, since you're here, I'll make some pastries for you later. Also, I'm planning to make a dress for you after I'm done." "Is that so?" Jiao was pleasantly surprised. She followed Moon Dream into the living room to see the unfinished dress. Ji Tianxing stood alone in the yard and looked around. Chapter 1645. "Old Ji, let me out." Qian Yu's voice suddenly rang out. It sounded anxious and excited. Ji Tianxing immediately stopped in his tracks and furrowed his eyebrows slightly. He secretly used his divine thought to ask Qian Yu, "Qian Yu, what happened?" Qian Yu hesitated for a moment before it said in a strange tone, "Old Ji, did you come to a strange place?" Ji Tianxing looked around and explained, "I'm in the Moon Fox tribe of the vast divine kingdom. I heard from Jiao that this is an ancient tribe that originated from ancient times. Judging from the style of the people and the architecture of this tribe, it is indeed a little special." Qian Yu was silent for a moment before it changed into an excited tone. It said expectantly, "Old Ji, you're in the divine kingdom and in an ancient tribe? Let me out quickly. The scenery in the divine kingdom must be beautiful. I want to see it too. I think I heard you say something about delicious food. I want to try it too." Qian Yu's change in tone made Ji Tianxing feel that something was wrong. "Don't you need to cultivate in seclusion? Why did you come out at this time?" Qian Yu said sarcastically, "Cultivating all day long will make my brain stupid, okay? I also need to rest and relax. Old Ji, you won't be so cruel to me, right?" Ji Tianxing knew its character and knew that there was something wrong with it. He said in a serious tone, "There must be something wrong. Tell me honestly, what do you want?" Qian Yu hesitated for a while before it told him the truth. "Old Ji, I don't know what's going on either. I vaguely feel that this place has something to do with me. Let me out and I'll see for myself. Then I'll know what's going on." Ji Tianxing turned his head to look at the only palace in the tribe. He stared at the fox statue at the top of the palace and observed it for a while. Ever since he came to the Moon Fox tribe, he noticed that there were fox pictures and statues everywhere in the tribe. The fox was not an ordinary demon beast. It was very majestic and had a bit of a celestial aura. After hearing Qian Yu's words, he also felt that something was wrong. After considering for a moment, he nodded in agreement. I can let you out, but you must behave yourself and don't cause trouble for me. Of course, you still don't believe me. Qian Yu of course promised. Ji Tianxing was relieved and opened the exit of the sword world. Shua. With a flash of icy blue light, Qian Yu flew out of the sword of burial of heaven. At this moment, it did not reveal its 300-meter-long true body. Its body had shrunk 1,000 times, and it was only the size of an ordinary fox. Its entire body was emitting an icy blue brilliance, and its 12 furry tails almost covered half of its body. After landing on the ground, it looked around with a cunning look in its eyes. Ji Tianxing was just about to remind it not to run around when Jiujiu and Moondream walked out of the room. They were talking and laughing as they walked into the courtyard. Tianxing, let's sit in the living room and talk. What's this? Jiujiu was talking to Ji Tianxing when she suddenly noticed Qian Yu, and her eyes lit up. Moondream also saw Qian Yu, and her body shook. She stared at Qian Yu with her eyes wide open. However, before they could see Qian Yu's face clearly, Qian Yu flew out of the house and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianxing frowned. He was about to send a voice transmission to Qian Yu to call it back. Jiujiu came up and asked curiously, Tianxing, is that little beast your pet? Ji Tianxing nodded. She looks quite cute. Why haven't I seen her before? Jiujiu stuck her head out and looked around. There was some anticipation in her eyes. Moondream's expression was complicated as well. She peeked out secretly, and her heart was filled with doubts. However, she was not familiar with Ji Tianxing, so she was too embarrassed to ask. Then, the three of them entered the living room and sat down. Moondream personally brewed tea for Ji Tianxing and Jiujiu. She also brought some spirit fruits before going to the kitchen to make some pastries. The tea was the Moon Fox clan's star spirit tea. It tasted refreshing, and one would have rolling spirit qi after drinking it. The spirit fruits were also a species unique to Mount Yaoyu. They were very attractive and contained wisps of star power. After Ji Tianxing ate the 2 spirit fruits, the star power merged into his body and subtly tempered his body. After all, he had cultivated the galaxy body tempering art and could absorb the star power to temper his body. The spirit fruits on Mount Yaoyu were very beneficial to him. Unfortunately, he was worried that Qian Yu would cause trouble, so he was distracted and could not focus on refining the star power. About an hour later, Moondream finally finished her work. She brought a plate of fragrant pastries to Ji Tianxing and Jiujiu. There were 8 crescent-shaped pastries on the simple silver tray. Each pastry was light silver and emitted bits of starlight. They were like the moon that had shrunk millions of times. The pastries were very exquisite. Even the texture was very particular. They also contained rich star power, which was very beneficial to cultivators. Jiujiu had been thinking about it for a long time. She eagerly picked up a pastry and tasted it. Ji Tianxing did not stand on ceremony and started tasting the moon mark. Moondream looked at the 2 of them expectantly, waiting for their comments. When the 2 of them were satisfied and full of praise, a smile bloomed on her face, revealing an expression of pride and honor. However, just as Ji Tianxing and Jiujiu were tasting the delicacies and Moondream was blissful, there was a sudden exclamation. Oh my God! Everyone looked. What's going on? The divine fox has appeared. A sudden clamor sounded in the air above the grassland. Ji Tianxing, Jiujiu, and Moondream were stunned. They hurriedly walked out of the living room and into the yard. The 3 of them looked toward the center of the tribe and saw the only palace in the tribe emitting starlight. Many Moon Fox clansmen in silver and white dresses were flying toward the palace quickly. More and more clamorous noises came from all around the palace. The originally peaceful Moon Fox tribe suddenly became lively and noisy. What's going on? Jiujiu frowned and looked at Moondream in confusion. Moondream was also confused. It seems like something happened in the temple. Could it be that Qian Yu got into trouble again? Ji Tianxing had a bad premonition and frowned. He only thought for a moment before flying into the sky and flying toward the temple. Let's go and take a look. Jiujiu and Moondream quickly followed him and flew toward the temple. In the blink of an eye, the three of them flew thousands of feet away and arrived at the entrance of the temple. There were already more than 200 people gathered outside the entrance of the ancient temple. Almost all the Moonfox clansmen were alarmed. The holy and solemn silver temple was enveloped in a dazzling silver light. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.